for everyone for being here. My name is Phil McDonald. I am the Associate Director of the Cinema History Program. I have a few opening remarks and then we will get going. I'll thank you to everyone for their patience. And I'm honored to welcome you to an extraordinary afternoon of storytelling, memory, and imagination. So thank you for coming here. Today marks a truly meaningful milestone, the first in-person convening between the Southern Oral History Program and the Legal Defense Fund's Third Year Institute as part of our oral history collaboration. That we are here together in person for the first time. It's not just symbolic, it's a testament to the bridge building potential of shared memory and collaborative scholarship. When we launched this project together, we shared a conviction that the stories behind the fight for civil rights, not just the legal briefs, but the people deserve to be preserved, honored, and made visible. This initiative, as LDF described it, is about sharing our history, informing our present, and envisioning our future. That framing has resonated with us deeply at the Southern Oral History Program, where oral history is not only about documenting what happened, but about making space for new futures to emerge through collective memory. Over the past 18 months, our teams have worked to interview lawyers, organizers, clients, and collaborators from across LDF's 85-year history. We've collected stories about victories, heartbreaks, strategies, and setbacks, stories that speak to the dignity and humanity at the core of LDF's mission. These interviews now live as part of a digital archive and video series that we hope will inspire future generations of students, scholars, and movement leaders. Today's panels will highlight the different facets of that work, from the ethics and crafts of documentation to the bold futures we can build by anchoring ourselves in history. We will hear from brilliant archivists, oral historians, educators, and attorneys, all of whom have shaped this project and are helping shape what comes next. But before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank some folks who made it possible. First, I would like to thank Melody Hunter-Leon and Susie Penman, and also Irene Newman for their extraordinary leadership in care and coordinating this oral history effort. We worked closely with narrators, interviewers alike, and your steady guidance has been crucial at every turn. I would like to thank all of our LDF collaborators, but especially Kayla Jenkins and Kimberly Perenzola. Thank you for your partnership, your creativity, your constant support, not just on the project, but in helping bring this symposium to life. It has meant the world to us. We extend a deep appreciation to Dr. Seth Koch, former director of SOHP, for getting this project off the ground, leading its early stages with clarity and vision. To all our narrators, thank you. Your stories are not only historically significant, but they are deeply personal, vulnerable, and powerful. They are gifts to all of us in the future. A heartfelt thank you as well to Terry Lorient, who quietly and consistently keeps the center of the study of the American South and the Southern Oral History Program running. Her care and dedication are behind every detail of what we do. And of course, thank you to today's panelists. Your time, your generosity, your willingness to share your insights with us, your reflections help us think more deeply about the power of this work and what makes it possible. And then finally, thank you to our sponsors. List them off really quick. UNC School of Law, LDF, the College of Arts and Sciences, the American Studies Department, the Center for the Study of the American South, the Institute for Arts and Humanities, Sonia Haynes Stone Center for Research in Black Culture and History, African American, and Diaspora Studies, and Public Policy. Today is about looking back, but also about listening forward. It's about honoring the people behind the cases, the communities behind the headlines, and the truths behind the transcripts. We are so glad that you're here to be a part of it. Let's get started. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil. As Phil mentioned, this panel today, our first panel session, is filled with SOHP field scholars and former field scholars, and SOHP staff, as well as LDF staff and LDF council. And we're excited to have you all here today. We have been collaborating as two teams together for 2 years, and it all started with the foundation that Dr. Seth Koch started working with LDF to bring this incredible and really distinctive project to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the Southern Oral History Program. I'm Melody Hunter-Leon. I am a field scholar with SOHP and a PhD candidate in American Studies. And so Koch is on my committee, I'm proud to say. So I'm going to have the other panelists introduce themselves and we'll get started with our discussion.
Thank you everyone for making the time to be here. My name is Kimberly Sola. I'm an assistant archivist with LDF.
Hey everyone, this is really exciting. It's fun for me to be back. My name is Susie Penman. I graduated from UNC a year ago from the American Studies Department. Seth Koch was my advisor. And but had the real pleasure of getting to work for SOHP for a few years while I was here, and in that capacity worked on the LDF World History Project. And now I'm in Dallas, Texas, at SMU. I'm the assistant director of the Center for Presidential History there.
Hi everyone, my name is Cass Mensa, she, her, I am LDF's Archives Council.
And I'm Jesse Paddock. I've been the videographer on the project. I'm filming a lot of these, and when I'm not doing that, I'm still a videographer in each video production closely.
We're going to launch right in. I'm going to start with Kim and Cass, and let's start from the beginning. How did this project come about? And why did it feel like, if there was indeed a sense of urgency to get this done?
Yeah, I can go ahead and get us started. So this is a project that is many, many years in the making. And I also think comes at a time when LDF has been reckoning with how we steward our own legacy and communicate that to the public. But the idea specifically for our Oral History Project came from our former President Director Council, who I was also honored last year at the Spring Symposium, Sherilyn Hickville, who, like so many others during COVID, was really reckoning with the loss of so many elders in so many facets of our life, right? In movements, that LDF has participated in, but, more broadly, I can think of, our own families and communities. And so this was a time where, when we're thinking about and processing grief, we're also thinking about how do we then hold on to the stories that we still have access to? How are we capturing, documenting, and honoring them? And so COVID really did put a sense of urgency in taking this project off the ground. And so from there, our amazing archives team, really led by Kayla Jenkins, manager of archives at LDF, helped put forward a planning grant with the support of the Mellon Foundation to create the blueprint for this project. And we put out a request for proposals. And we also had support with the oral historian Gabe Solis, who is the executive director of Texas After Violence Project, that is now the After Violence Project. So they've moved their scope beyond Texas to really think about the ethics of how we're approaching this project as well, which I know we'll get into a little bit more later. And SOHP was selected as the collaborator for this initiative, which I think makes so much sense, given the attention, expertise on this particular region of the country that I think is so often in historiography misunderstood or characterized in really simplified ways. And so we really are proud to be partnering with SOHP for this project. And that really was also the effort of Seth Koch, who is our principal investigator, and also a professor here of American Studies at UNC, as well as Sarah Wood, who is a former SOHP field scholar and program manager. And so they really helped bring this project from this idea that, we all want to honor the contributions of the elders and people that came before us to what we now have as, a collection that's published online, and hopefully is an amazing resource for folks that are looking to learn more about LDF's history. The last thing I'll say, and then I will hand it off, is that as archivists, so I am trained as an archivist, there are many aspects of our work, but one of them is making this information accessible. It is also, the documentation, the appraisal, organizing, but the accessibility of it, I think, is a huge piece. And to work at a place like LDF, where the records, largely legal written records, are subject to other types of restrictions as it relates to attorney-client privilege, other ethical obligations of the profession, they can be very disconnected from people's everyday life. And so oral history also has a really powerful, as a methodology, is really powerful to connecting people to the people behind the law and how it's used and how it's shaped and how it's made. And so I really can't think of a better way of connecting this history back to the people than through oral history. And so that I think is an important task of the archives, you know, especially of a civil rights legal archives that is LDF.
It is amazing the many stories that we've heard, and Kim, as you alluded to, many legal cases, when we think about how law impacts everyday life. But what are the stories about how that came about, how these laws for equality and justice came about? And when we think about it too, and you guys will hear some of the stories, there were some really young attorneys, some of them who had never been in the South, some of them who knew nothing about the South really and what the culture really looks like, except for a couple of things they heard through the news. And that's what this project really does. It brings the stories to life. So let me ask each of you, because each of you have a different role in how do we bring all of this law and everyday impacts of law to life, the stories. If you all tell me about your roles in doing that, and then maybe also some surprises that came along the way that you weren't expecting.
Sorry, because there's a mic right in front of me. So I work at LDF as our archives counsel, so I'm an attorney and I work exclusively with the archives team. And so my role is to assist the archivists as they're going through our collection, processing it, surveying it, digitizing it. Things come to me before they go on our website to make sure that we're covering our legal basis. As you can imagine, most of our collection is case files, so there's a lot of Word documents in there that are totally fine to share because they've been shared before. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's letters between attorneys and clients that are very squarely protected by things like attorney-client privilege, or like HIPAA, FERPA for academic records, things like that. And then there's this like very messy gray area for all the rest of our collection. And that's pretty much where I live, kind of assessing whether or not we can share things that legally are permissible to share, but there might be other reasons why we might not want to share it. For example, safety concerns from witness statements or conflicts between attorneys that were never intended to see the light of day, were written 50 years ago, and things like that. And so for the oral history program project, I also do review of the transcripts before they go online. And my role there is really just to make sure that like we're covering our legal basis and protecting folks, because our narrators have great memories and tell really vivid stories and are including individuals who might not have consented to have those stories told, and there might be other concerns. But I'm also trying to balance like consent, the access piece of making sure that these folks can tell their stories in their own words, in their own ways, and that I'm like having a very light hand and just kind of doing the final check versus like censoring folks who actively consented to be part of this project. That's another question I forgot the second part.
I was just wondering about any surprises as you were doing this. I know I ran into some, I think each of us might have anything that surprised you or particularly struck you.
Yeah, I mean, I can get into this later, but there's so many like through lines that came up through the stories that were being told. And so they like shared memories, even though folks weren't like in the same room when certain things happened. Like a lot of folks mentioned where they were when MLK was assassinated, for example, and that really stuck with me. I found that profound because it wasn't a question that you necessarily asked in interviews, but it was just like came up in the conversation. But in terms of my role, I think one thing that I recognized early on is that I should treat the oral history project differently than I treat the other records that I review, because these folks are consenting to this project and very actively involved in it and want to be involved and have their story told, whereas that letter between attorneys from the 1960s was like never intended to be shared. And so like that context matters, and like analyzing things through that lens is important. And so yeah, there's a lot of gray area and it's very hard to find. The thing that I found most challenging when I started this role is how unique it is. Like I haven't been able to find other attorneys who do this. And so it's been kind of isolating, but I've been able to find like general counsel who does work, consulting archivists every once in a while, so I could like bounce off ideas with them. But it's a very like unique role, which is such a privilege, but it's also a challenge to be okay with like kind of making up the rules as I go, and trusting my like own instincts and analysis for things.
Jesse, a lot of the engagement, right, that the public will have with these videos is really in part dependent on your role as the videographer. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure, yeah, this has been probably the most important work I've ever done. It's changed my life and opinion on things so deeply. And I probably have come to part of this because I'm not trained as an oral historian. My background's in documentary film and even less nobly in reality television. So I was trained to look for sound bites and B-roll. And I think the first like half dozen meetings that I was involved with, I was like, so how are we gonna cover this? That's like the documentary filmmaker question, like how are we gonna cover this? And people on the call was like, what is this guy talking about? Like, we're not gonna cover it at all. It's going to be like the interview is going to be the interview. And it actually took me like a shameful long time to understand that. I was always trying to like film other stuff and then like eventually understood like it's the voice, it's the bass, it's the depth of experience. And I mean, it's not a surprise, these people have been incredibly generous with their time and their wealth of experience. They welcome us to our homes. I think from a filming standpoint, we want it to feel sort of authentic to their lived experience. So if they wanted to be, if these narrators wanted to be in their office, we'd be in the office. If they want to be in their home, I mean, a lot of people have been interviewed many, many times and are extremely media savvy and they have places in their home that have been filmed by, you know, news crews and other actual documentaries and things. So just sort of like getting to spend time and not rushing to get a soundbite. I think that's like that was the big thing for me is that we're not producing sound bites here. You know, the people who created the interview guides do incredibly deep research on it. But it's a conversation. Or it's not even really a conversation, it's just like we go as long as people go. We ask, we don't, you know, like I think from the beginning I was like, oh, you know, someone would say, not like establish who the person was in my head. I was like, oh, you need to get like a pickup shot with like them saying it again. So it took me a long time to edit, you know what I mean? So I was thinking of the edit, and it's been amazing to like turn off that side of the brain and just embrace storytelling in a longer format. That's like I would say the distance I've traveled.
Yes, but you know what, Jesse isn't telling you everything. Jesse is like a historian's videographer because he loves history. He loves history, he's very curious about people, so he's really the perfect person to have in this role on the project. And I'm gonna go to Susie now. Susie Pittman, who has been an oral historian on the project, conducting interviews, but also Susie coordinated like the logistics, right? She was in that role as well. But Susie, can you talk about what the
Yeah, and I want to say that, first of all, I had no idea there was any sort of learning curve for you, Jesse, because being in the room with you and watching you set up was really sort of impressive, and a big part of that job is making narrators comfortable and also making me comfortable because, you know, it's a setup, and so just kudos to you for that. My role was more was the first time I'd taken on any sort of like managerial aspect. So there was a learning curve for me and I loved it because it meant that despite not getting to like, do all the interviews, I got to talk to everyone. And that was really an honor. I loved communicating with all of our narrators from the very beginning of, you know, picking up the phone and calling them to, you know, like I remember Conrad Harper sending him transcripts that, you know, went to the wrong address and stuff. Like, I mean, just totally delightful people. And that was a thrill and an honor for me. It was a privilege to get to do a couple of the oral histories and yeah, working on every aspect of a project from sending the interview guides ahead of time to then the, you know, the I think a fun part of an oral history is doing oral history. And then comes the behind the scenes work of transcribing it and checking that transcription with narrators, which I think we'll talk about a little more later. But, you know, I think that's where I spent the bulk of my time. And that was really fascinating. And it also meant that part of the job was having to listen to all of the oral histories, which was just totally wonderful. Great to hear all the stories from the narrators and also to hear people like Melody and Seth and Gabe conduct the oral histories. I think it's the best way to learn as an oral historian is to listen to oral histories. So that was wonderful.
It's really true, and I agree that, I'm doing some transcribing now, and I've been listening to Danita. Gosh, Danita, like, this is what I should be doing, this is how I should do it, she did amazing. Also, Alyssa Ray Thunderberg, I do want to mention her, she's the Mellon-funded oral historian at the Margaret Walker Center in Jackson, Mississippi. So she's been doing a good deal of the interviews in the Deep South for us. And Ruben Anderson was one of those, and you're gonna see part of that in just a moment, but absolutely is a delight to transcribe, and Anna has said the same thing when she's transcribed, and she'll come back and say, oh my gosh, Melanie, this interview is great. And I loved hearing how Danita, her method, right, of going through this methodology of oral history. Kim, did you want to say anything else about your role?
Grab this one. Yeah, so not to repeat anything that folks have said, but on our end too, so as we receive these interviews, because this really is a collaborative process, and we're so grateful for all the work that the Southern Oral History Program does to make this project possible. On our end, we're also thinking about the larger collection as a whole, right? Because it's not just one-off interviews. We really are seeing this as a collection of stories that are telling the history of LDF during a particular period. And so one thing that we're mindful of is who are we interviewing, right? The narrator selection process, I think, is something that we are doing our best to give as much attention to, and really representing all the different aspects of what has made LDF the organization that it is today. And so, of course, what comes to mind immediately are the LDF lawyers, right? These are the people in the courtrooms who are visible, maybe giving press interviews, etc. But the organization isn't just the LDF lawyers. There are a whole suite of people that make all of this possible. And some of those individuals are the cooperating attorneys that are living in the communities where a lot of these cases are coming from. And these are also individuals that have grown up in their communities and that have to see the before and after of a case, right? And so we'll hear a little bit more about that, I think, in some of the clips. And if not, the collection is online. I don't think we've said it yet, but the website is ldfrecollection.org. So please, take the time. It is 100% worth it. I think anyone I've talked to that has been able to sit down and listen to them has taken a lot from it. But cooperating attorneys, we can't tell the story of LDF without naming and sharing those stories as well. And then another piece, right, are the clients. The cases don't exist without the clients. And so how can we have the history of LDF without also representing and having these folks share in their own words what it has meant for them to, be in a situation of injustice and do something about it. That process of doing that is as relevant then as it is now. And then finally, I think the other kind of category of individual that we felt important to highlight as a part of this are the staff members, the other folks that are making all of this possible. And, there is an interview, it's not published yet. And I'll say, to be honest, we don't have that many staff members in the collection, but we were able to interview Jim Pepler, who is a photographer, was a photographer for LDF, and also has worked on other piece of photography, I think, for the Southern Courier in Alabama. And much of his photographic collection exists at the Department of Alabama History and Culture Department. He has a very different perspective on all of this. And I know Jesse was at, filming that interview as well. And so, how do we capture visually what's happening, and how do we use photography to tell the story as a part of the case? These are all kind of different touch points that ultimately have resulted in, some victories and losses at LDF, but make LDF the organization that it is today. So the narrator selection process is very, something that we give a lot of time and attention to as the archives team when we're thinking about how do we communicate the history of LDF to the public.
This question for everybody on the panel. So this project in general centers on ethics of care, and so for each person, what does that look like in your practice in the archives, production, or for the interviews themselves?
For me, I think that started with just that very initial communication with the potential narrators, gauging their interest, being really open about what the project was and what we were doing with it. And then, the really collaborative process of sending them the interview questions in advance. You know, that was something I actually had not done much before as an oral historian, and am totally in support of now. It sort of changed the way I think about it, because my fear was that it would result in someone like holding the questions and reading them, and that just does not happen, or it didn't with so far. I don't think with anyone, you know, and I think it helped establish, you know, trust between us and the narrators, and also, you know, these are people who've done so much work and so many different things, and a lot of it was quite a long time ago. And so we weren't interested in trying to like get any like gotcha moments from anyone. It was, you know, we wanted it to be, as Jesse put it, you know, a conversation in part, and something where our narrators could feel relaxed and confident that we weren't gonna spring anything on them, which is, you know, so not what we would ever do at SOHB, but I think setting the interview questions was a huge part of that. And then subsequently, after the interview, the transcription process, and making sure that narrators were okay with these documents that are on the LDF website now. And, you know, making it clear to them that this is your product, this is your interview. We are, you know, stewards of it to an extent, but it's gonna go online, everyone can see it. Are you okay with it? And really not moving forward with the help of LDF, and not moving forward until they felt totally confident in that transcript. And that was, that's something that I've taken with me, and it was so important, the questions, and that really, as I said earlier, that lengthy process of transcription work, which is absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I think because I come in so late in the process, and like Susie said, there was so much pre-work being done, like, and we touched on it a little bit, but like all the research that you do for the interview guides too is so thoughtful. And so I think a big part of my role in terms of like maintaining like an ethics of care is to like honor all the work that you all did, and not come in with like a big black marker at the end and like really like censor a project that was like an effort to like make sure that we're allowing the narrator to tell the story how they want to tell it. So I try to very much treat this differently than the rest of the privilege review that I do, and I'm recognizing they consented to this. They showed up, they invited us into their home, so it would cause a lot of harm actually if I came in and like tried to change the way they said things. So it really only, I think, redacted one tiny sentence in one interview, and it was the legal part of my brain and couldn't find a way of justifying not redacting it. Like I tried really hard and then recognized that it kind of falls squarely within attorney-client privilege, and so I just wanted to be safe. But aside from that, like I just read them, and it's such a pleasure. It just feels like the best part of my week is when a transcript comes through and I just get to read it like a book, and leave it at that. I think that's like an important part of like being able to learn as a lawyer too, to collaborate with folks from other fields and like trust that they have the expertise to do the work, and that I'm playing like a pretty minimal role in this process, and to not come in at the end and like ruin everything.
I would say from my perspective is to try and tread lightly. I think the one difference with this project from other oral histories, I think in oral history, you can put a Zoom recorder on the table and just start having a conversation, and the production aspect of it falls away for the narrator. And so I think one thing we try to balance, or at least be cognizant of, is I'm coming in an hour ahead of time with a case that has a light in it, and another case that's got multiple lenses and a couple cameras, and to not sort of like to set up as quickly as possible and as sort of lightly as possible, so as not to, you know, interrupt the magic that's going to happen when the conversation begins, you know, and sort of be, we know we want them to look a certain way and to sound a certain way, but to not be so fussy about it. I think like that's the thing to try and, that we would try and avoid, is to like have the technical things overwhelm the warmth of the actual images.
Would you guys like to see next one? Would you like to hear from one of our folks? Okay, so we were talking earlier about surprises or challenges, narrative turning points. And so this is one that we, at least I know for me, and I did not interview Ruben Anderson, but I loved looking at his videotaped interview, and I loved reading the transcript. And so because I think he really gets to the point of what a lot of the LDF attorneys experienced during the civil rights movement. They were very young, they were going out there, some not familiar with the South, as I have said before. And yet it was truly, literally on the job training. So Mr. Anderson is going to talk a little bit about that and how he first came to know about LDF.
Speaking of your career, you know about LDF before you.
I knew nothing about the Little Fish Fund until, I think I got a letter from Marion Wright or either Jack Greenberg that, asked me what I was gonna do after graduation. And I told them I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. And that's when they asked me when I joined the Fish Fund office here in Jackson. And I wrote Marion back and told her yes, and told Mr. Greenberg yes, and so that's where we are. I spent 5 years with him.
Can you tell me a little bit about those 5 years? You did a lot of cases, right?
Well, I guess the best way to describe it is that, I graduated from Ole Miss Law School, I think it was June 3rd of 1967. I left my swearing in and went to Columbus, Mississippi, and tried a lawsuit accused the civil rights leaders in Columbus had been arrested and charged with aggravated assault. So that's pretty much what I did from that day for the next 5 years.
Okay, what's amazing about that is what Mr. Anderson talked about there was not dissimilar to what many of the attorneys told us about what their experiences were, whether they went out in the field or whether they were in the New York office, you know, preparing briefs or whatever it was, or if they were even down south, in the deep south, preparing and getting ready for trial, that they were literally thrown right in. And so it definitely takes a particular type of, a special type of person and attorney to do that. So, but I think Phil has one final question for our panelists, and then we'd like to open it up to you guys to ask some questions.
So again, this is for everybody. What do you hope future scholars, students, and communities take away from this collection?
Let's start with your reading.
I was actually lucky enough this morning to go to a friend who teaches an AP constitutional law class at a high school in Durham. And so he knew of the project and had been wanting to hear his students hear more about it. And they happened to be doing 14th equal production clause this week. And so I was in this morning and I talked about, you know, Jack Boger talking about the 8th and the 14th death penalty work, talked about a lot about Jackson and just like, you know, Anderson versus Holmes, like things that were happening by the late 60s, like 15 years after Brown. And the students were enthralled, they were like so excited about it. And so I really want the next phase to be to try to figure out some way to like build some curriculum out of this stuff. We have this immense wealth that's on there now. We have more to come. And to try to find a way to help students at whatever level, find a way to make that to make that research more alive for them. And because I think there's obviously, you know, constitutional interest happening in the present day, and so seeing that long civil rights, I think this is just a magnificent resource for that. And I want to find some avenues to create, like, to make that available to young people.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you were talking about this as an archives department in like a team meeting a few weeks ago, but like we really we're so excited about the collection as a whole, that because we were so like intimately involved in it and and the World History Project, that like We have tidbits and like quotes that really stood out to us, but like we're ultimately stewards of the collection that's just out there now, and so we're really excited to see what stands out for other folks and what they create from it. And like my dream is for folks to like find a quote from one of these interviews and like maybe build off a personal essay about it or an art project. Like I'm really excited to see what generates from here. But in terms of like takeaways from this moment, like for me, what really resonated was the fact that like oral histories give you an opportunity to really humanize people who like you kind of put on a pedestal and like for right reason, they've done incredible work. But when you see them like in their homes or in their offices talking about these stories, they're very much people who like just decided to kind of step away from like the inertia of feeling overwhelmed in the civil rights movement and just decide to kind of invest and dedicate their work to advocating for people. And so it kind of like reminded me that like, even though right now everything feels like really overwhelming and hopeless, that like it's actually possible for all of us to find the thing that we can do to contribute to kind of moving the needle in the direction we want. And not feel like it's like an unattainable thing only for like these big elders who we all know and respect. It's like possible for us to do it too.
I think for me, one of the things I found myself considering after doing or listening to any of these interviews is that this work could be taken for granted easily. None of these legal victories were guaranteed. The sheer scope of work that went into each one is staggering. And, you know, I think everyone that I've listened to, no one was like, yeah, I did this. It was like so collaborative. LDF is a huge network. It's not just the lawyers, as we've talked about, it's the librarians, it's the whole staff. And yeah, none of it was guaranteed. I know a lot of this is in the South, and the work continues, and that was made really clear. There's so many resonances, you know, from then and now, thinking about how relevant these interviews are. That was the main thing that struck me, and in thinking about what I hope people might take away from the actual website, the interviews themselves, as far as you know, the accessibility of the website goes. I actually was telling Kim earlier, I used the website when I was giving a presentation to a class at SMU about what we can do with oral histories, and I was like, wow, there's this great website, and went and you know, I think it's a lot of work to get people interested in, like, oral histories are long, and you know, people don't typically sit down and listen to like 2.5 hour interviews, unless you're me, and I love it. But you know, I think y'all have done a great job of, you know, putting these segments up and thinking about ways to digest this information. And so I hope that it becomes a great learning tool, but I think it's off to a good start. I think the website's really beautiful, and it's something that we talked a lot about at SOHP last year. Is like, what do you do with oral histories? That's the evergreen question, and I think so far y'all done a good job.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one thing I've been reflecting about, and I know you asked another question, Mel, about like what are moments that have stood out to us, and I think overall, I just really have appreciated the diversity of life paths that this collection exposes us to. There isn't like a one cookie cutter way that someone becomes involved in the universe of LDF or the broader civil rights movement. And, you know, I think there's one interview that I think of she was an LDF lawyer, and, you know, she recalls coming from a more conservative and even like right-wing type background. And she was maybe even a little ashamed of it, just in the way that she was communicating it. But, you know, I think it was so important for her to share that path, share what books she read, what professors influenced her. And then you kind of realize that it's all these little things that accumulate over time that can shift people's perspectives. And, you know, that's one story. There's, of course, people that come from and have come from families where, you know, they grew up in the NAACP chapter leadership, and they're surrounded by these messages. And that is a story that we also have in this collection. But it is a collection of stories that are quite diverse in that way, but who have ultimately committed a good chunk of their lives to fighting for civil rights. And I think that that message should still resonate with us today when we think about movements for justice that, you know, are still necessary and urgent in this day and age. You know, what is our path there? It's not necessarily, you know, that we have to come from a particular background, but if we see the injustice and we feel called to take action, that's all it takes, really, at the end of the day. And so I hope that, you know, with this collection, as you all can explore on ldfrecollection.org, you know, you find those tidbits and you reflect on yourself, like, oh yeah, like I read this book and it changed my mind on this thing. And you share that with other people too. And so I'm also just, you know, really happy that our interview guides, we've taken the time to actually parse out those questions, because while it is the LDF World History Project, you learn so much more about these people than just their time at LDF. You learn about where they grew up, maybe their neighborhood, you know, something that happened in their high school, and then they go to college. What is it like to make the decision to go to law school? Like, these are questions that are evergreen, I think, for students here. And then finding your first job, like it's very relatable, you know. So I hope people can kind of see themselves in these stories as well.
And I'll make this very quick because I do want you guys to share your questions. But for me, it was, again, that LDF was open to having SOHP include these life history questions, the bio questions, and not just focusing on, okay, your career is LDF. And, you know, the focus is that. But the fact that you guys were so open to, and I said it was probably you and Sarah who worked with LDF and understanding and explaining why it was so critical to having the life history questions in there, so that because becoming an LDF attorney, I think probably, or staff member, doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's, as you were saying, all those things that lead up to it, those discussions over the dinner table with their parents growing up in certain places, all those things are what happened to them, you know, when they were going to high school or middle school, if they were integrating in school. So all of those things factor into it. And the last thing I would just say is that it definitely has been a privilege for me. I was really stunned and felt so honored when Seth and Sarah asked if I would go out and do an interview. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to do an LDF interview. That, I mean, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. I'm proud, and even though I'm still working on my dissertation, people are always surprised when I say, this is, I know, the most important project I'll ever work on. Just really proud. And now I think we're ready for some questions. So if you have questions, raise your hand. We will bring the mic to you. So, questions? Please introduce yourself also.
My name is Franco Hazard. I'm 2L NCC Law. My question, if you want me asking, is about the funding for a project like this, how that came about.
Great question. So this project is generously funded by the Mellon Foundation, and part of that funding goes for just, you know, producing these interviews, but then there's staff time from LDF. So myself and Cass, we're both staff members at the Legal Defense Fund. So I wear multiple hats there. I help with the Oral History Project. I also help with other archival processing work and staff. And Cass is the Archives Council. So in addition to her work with the reviewing of the transcripts, she's also performing other functions for the department. And so the Mellon Grant really has been, you know, an amazing opportunity for us to be able to bring this idea to life. And I'll also say that they fund a lot of, you know, similar projects. And so there's smaller level grants as well, because this was years in the making, like I mentioned earlier, initiative that is also this collaboration with the Southern Oral History Program that has their own, you know, ongoing program with other oral history projects. But, you know, I would encourage you, or, you know, happy to chat after about like other ways to try to find funding, because I think, you know, if there's the interest in kind of having similar projects for maybe more local or other, you know, topics, you know, that's honestly the harder part. I think just finding the people who want to do that kind of work, and then, you know, trying to find funding as well is a big piece. But happy to always chat more about that too.
Thank you. I do want to thank North Constitution University students for being here. Of course, the great Julius Chambers, who was the director counsel for LDF for many years, was a graduate of Central and the chancellor at NC Central. So thank you all for being here.
Hi, I'm Michaela Johnson. I'm a junior in faculty. I'm pretty well track as of right now. And I just wanted to ask, how do you guys plan to get these like wonderful stories to the people that need them most? Like me, like I would love to learn about like all the stuff, like how people got into law school, like what their background was and how like all of the interesting things, but with, you know, like social media and TikTok being like kind of like the biggest like platform for like disseminating information for people that are my age, how do you guys plan to like champion that and get that information to us?
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're at now. Now that it's finally out, we can breathe a little, because we met that deadline. We're like trying to get it in front of the people. We actually just met like a couple weeks ago, and we have a lot of ideas about how to reach younger folks in rural areas, students who have been pushed out, like the folks that are honestly harder to reach, if they're not part of like a larger institution, but would very much benefit from this. We've been thinking about getting, hopefully, I'm looking at Carla, my boss, but we've been thinking about getting guest writers. We have an editorial side of our website where folks write about certain cases LDF has litigated, as well as like particular archival records that are of interest. And like I would love for that space to be a space where like other writers or young people get to write about the things that stood out to them. And so hopefully that could be one way. And I think, yeah, utilizing things like TikTok and stuff for communicating, we're working with our comms team to kind of develop a plan on that, but I'm not in my 20s anymore, so I'm like the words other folks about that.
Just have one follow-up question, because I think that's such an important question. I'm just curious how you found out about this event, because that's information for us, right? Like we're, you know, did our best to try to get this on listservs, you know, let folks know that we know who are in UNC. But you know, this is even just one university, one day. So we would love to have a more kind of ongoing, you know, connection to the campus.
Well, my class, I'm in psychology 250. And our teacher offers like extra credit for coming to like different types of Stone Center events. And this was one of the events on the list, but it was one of the events I was more interested in. So that's why I decided to come to this one. She has like a long list of events that you can go to, but I was more interested in this and that's why.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erica Wilson. I'm a law professor here at UNC. And so my question actually follows up on the previous question about leveraging social media to promote the project. Do you have concerns about the ethics of social media and how you might leverage it in a way that accounts for the way that social media can take things and distort them? I guess the broader question is, any ethical concerns about using social media to leverage the project? Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, I think that LDF's archives department as a whole has been grappling with that question of like what happens once our archives are out there. We're obviously a very prominent civil rights organization, and there are people who would use our records in various ways. And so that's always kind of back of our mind and influences our decisions in terms of how we get this information out there. I think I mentioned earlier, like there's so many steps along the way to create these interviews that by the time they get on the website, we feel good and safe about it. Can't control what folks do with it, but I think for the most part, like there's so many checkpoints along the way and so much involvement from my supervisor and the leadership team at LDF to really think through how this is going to present that. Once it's on the website, I try not to think about it anymore, but the social media question is an interesting one, and I think it will pose unique challenges with like sound bites and things like that. But I think that like LDF has always dealt with that with all of our content, just by the nature of the work that we do and the communities that we work with. So I think that we're like ready to deal with whatever comes up. And I've only worked in civil rights organizations, and I used to work at an abortion organization, and so like I'm very much aware of like the threats that can come with that. But I also recognize that like
there's like safety precautions, aside from the safety precautions and things like that you can do, you can't really control that side of it, so we just try to make sure that like we're proactive and have thought-through things as much as possible. And that we're really just focusing on getting this to the folks who want it, and focusing on that.
So we got, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Just one last little thing to say about that. So, in addition to, being in this collaboration with SOHP and conducting it, the interviews themselves, as like archival objects, live within the LDF archive. So we have the copyright to the full audio transcript video files. I think it is a great question though, because things get taken out of context all the time. But one thing is we also treat them as, bits of information that need to be cited. So we do have citation information on each interview page and just on the website generally for any information that's being accessed. And I think one thing that also benefits us in order to kind of avoid that like miscontextualization or just, not having any context is that the interviews are conducted in a way where we're not necessarily trying to produce sound bites. Like, it almost like would be awkward sometimes to try to just like pull apart little pieces. I know it's possible, right? Because now AI, you can kind of make anyone sound like anything, but in terms of, how we actually present this project online and how it should be used, we do provide instruction on that. And so I think that does help us if we do kind of come to a point where someone is using it in a way that is harmful or just misrepresenting what a narrator is attempted to say.
We did start a little late, so we're using some of the break time for the questions, and we have time for one more question if anybody has one. Yes.
Hey, my name is Pat Jenkins. I'm a retired attorney from the Charlotte area and also someone who has great admiration for the LDF for many reasons. But my question's for Cass. Maybe it's a little bit of a legal geeky question, but you referred to concerns about confidentiality of attorney communications back and forth in the past, things that never were intended to see the light of day. Did you ever have interviews where the narrator got into that area about those conversations and you decided that, hey, this is something we really want to bring out? Can we go and get the other person who was party to that, get them to consent to it so that you could put it in, or did that never come up?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't come up in the oral histories I've reviewed so far. I think the piece that I ended up redacting was an attorney was talking about a conversation they had with a client, kind of updating them on the case. It's hard with archival records to go and try to get the consent of folks, since all these folks are no longer with us, so that's like always a challenge. But for the most part, I try to treat, when it comes to archival records, I try to treat that kind of like work product correspondence. I try to share as much of it as I can, so long as it doesn't like harm the reputation of a particular individual or institution. And it's funny to me, one of the most, I think the best thing about my job is like, this was like before Twitter and before Slack, that people like went out their way to type angry letters sometimes, or like to mail things to folks. And I think like that extra effort is so interesting to me, but I try to, balance the reputational concerns with the need for open access. But that is one way of dealing with it, is to try to get the consent to folks, but that's very difficult in an archival context. So I try to just kind of weigh, I like balance a lot of factors. I have a whole very nerdy document that I use for this without getting into the weeds of it. But it is kind of like a case by case decision. And like whether or not those folks are alive is a big part of that too, because defamation only applies to folks who are alive. So that's a big, nice little loophole as well. And so there's a lot of other ways of navigating these issues that I try to just treat each thing as it comes and do my own analysis.
Thank you all for your questions, and if you will join me now in thanking our panelists. Housekeeping, our next panel, History is a Call to Action, Building the Record and Imagining the Future. That's going to begin in about 5 minutes, so it'll be a little bit later than 3:45 when we get started on that. But let's take let's say 7 minutes, y'all wanna say that, so you have enough time to, get something to drink and eat out there, we do have snacks, but we'll begin that in 7 minutes. Again, there are light refreshments in the lobby, please help yourself. We do encourage you to come back though in 7 minutes for panel session number 2. And please do join us at 5 p.m. for our keynote event and then the reception afterwards. Thank you all so much for being here.
I don't know if they're here.
Yes, right, but, it's like the battery. It was a good day.
I didn't, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What I'm today.
I also need to check.
Oh, what I said. No, I would wait, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's the easiest way. You're in time for the second. Oh, that's even proud of you. Mighty good to see you. Me too, and I'm gonna introduce you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm tagging like a good portion of them. And you got it. Well, yeah, but I got it. Because I got you. Yeah. But I got tickets to. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
That's very good. That is very good.
Okay.
Yes. What I would say is, I can't remember what those really studies. Oh, yeah, I'm like.
Yeah.
Okay, that way.
I can be at the table. Do you want me to do that first?
No, your
Nick?
angel.
Nick? Yeah, gotcha. There, seats now, so it wouldn't have been down.
Right, I don't know that there were some projects in place
Yeah.
that would have had it, and that would be a question, Cass. Who was the young lady who was talking about the artifacts and stuff. That
Yeah. Okay.
It is good.
But anyway, yeah, but I'm glad you.
I think we'll see it, we'll keep looking for it. It's disability, and I just really, just, yeah. I don't know, because the hospital, that's a long walk. Let me go and find out. Yeah. Hey. What you doing? See you. Oh my goodness gracious.
Did you have a parking nightmare like everyone else?
Yeah, I thought it was like. So,
Apparently, yeah.
anyway. So how, you ready?
Good, I guess so, yeah.
How's everything?
Good. So, it's always like.
Yeah, yes. Maybe that is like. Sorry, maybe it's something else.
I do need to figure out who's gonna actually play the clips for us.
I'll make sure that Phil gives you one of his calls. I'll just step down. Is there any?
In general, grab my phone here, and you're gonna let me.
I will.
There's a section.
Like the first section. That'll be before, right, like this is how much money you have. And then after that, it's like, after that, like how much time. Comes everybody.
I mean, you know which one they are, right? But I don't think, I think we bailed on the help.
Oh, we're not on top of
I mean,
copy.
well, we bailed on playing field though. Well, so I don't know how, like, how you guys handled it in the last one. Oh, it was, it is in the PowerPoint.
It's in the PowerPoint. I think the thing is the PowerPoint needs to be dragged over into the window. I think that's what's happening at the moment. So I need to.
I don't know where the shortened version of it is.
I don't think it's in here yet. Let me check. Who's came up with?
That's the experience I have. One of the experiences.
That one looks maybe. I think, yeah, they're working it out. This is Ted's phone.
Oh, just hit this, right? Start the timer. No, it's
Oh,
the
wait.
timer. JPEG that.
So I'm not sure if they have your. Oh, wait, that's okay. They don't. I've been. Sorry, 3 times your name.
Alright, so small seats. Thank you all for being here all on this side of the room. Thanks also for the folks joining us online. I know a couple of our narrators are with us online, so to them especially. So I'm Kayla Jenkins, manager of archives at LDF. And I've been co-leading the Oral Street project since we started around 2021, working with the dream team that you heard from in the first panel, first one I heard about. And in this second panel, we're going to kind of build on that question of now what? So we have these oral histories, you know, how are we going to use them? What do they mean? Oral history and archives and history kind of in general as well. So we'll be imagining how LDF history and particularly firsthand accounts of that history can be used as a tool to defend past gains and to create the future that we all need. It's an honor to be up here or down here with this group of interdisciplinary group of people whose work and perspectives I deeply admire. And I'm excited to hear their ideas and experiences around activating history in courtrooms, classrooms, creative works, and in the community. And then after the discussion, we'll have a few minutes for questions, and virtual attendees can put their questions in the chat at any time. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists to please briefly introduce yourselves. Good afternoon. My name is Renee Alexander Kraft, and I'm Director of the Southern Oral History Program. I'm also a professor in the Department of Communication, in the Curriculum and Global Studies, and an associate adjunct professor in African American and African Diaspora Studies.
Thanks, Renee. Hi, I'm Danita Mason Hovens. I'm chair of Bridging the Gap nonprofit with DMH. I'm an oral historian, activist, educator, writer, and just movement woman.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla McAndrews, and I am director of the Thurgood Marshall Institute.
Good afternoon, I'm Jack Boger. I'm a retired professor of law. I was here at Chapel Hill from 1990 to 2017. But before that, for 12 wonderful years, was a lawyer at LDF.
Hello, everybody. I am Leah Aiden, and currently I'm the senior counsel at LDF. And I also like to consider myself a de facto member of our internal archives team because like many staffers at LDF, we love history and realize how critical it is to everything that we do every day.
Oh, this one. Okay. All right, I'm gonna start with the lawyers down at the end. So Jack, my first question is for you. So Jack was instrumental in some of the early strategic planning around how we were gonna share LDF's archives with the public. A lot of what Cass spoke about in the previous panel. And he was also our first narrator in this project. So Jack, my question for you is, what do you want the next generation to learn by listening to interviews with you and your LDF colleagues, and also by looking at the archival records from your cases?
Well, let me parry that very good question for just 1 minute and speak about archives. One of the things I think is wonderful about having archival work like you've done is I can't see in the future and know what the uses are going to be. And even the finest history book ultimately introduces you to what the historian thought at the time. The great part about visual and documentary archives is that you can re-see and review and reanalyze things at a time where no one in my era could have foreseen that was part of what was right there in front of me and just missed it. So I'm really thrilled about that. But to answer your question more specifically for 2 or 3 minutes, we've already started to hear the kinds of uses. I'm thrilled that there are law students who might be interested, or prospective people who might use it to make the choice about whether to go to law school. I think practicing lawyers, not only civil rights lawyers, but others, would find some uses here, and judges and public officials as well, if they go deep. And I'll talk about that in a minute. People have already said that it's important probably for communities and community leaders, particularly communities of color, to think about their own struggles and ask themselves, do I want to get into litigation? What would be the cost of that? What would be the burdens I would have to bear? How long does that take? Do you get the results that you hope for? And if you're only partially successful, how would that feel? And so to be able to make judgments about that. I think the larger public needs some look at what it means to see that law can change, that there are rights that can be deepened, that there are those who've been deprived of rights who can be brought forward. It's also very useful to see how much resistance there is, not just violent resistance, although we know of that, but resistance cleverly through brilliant lawyers on the other side who work to fight against what legal defense fund was doing, and then if won, to start immediately to see how you can undermine it and evade it and move away from it, so that what was started as Brown versus Ford ends up in 2017 or 2018 with more black children in the South in segregated schools than there were in 1965. And so all of that is stuff that the archival material can bring to light to people and not in the fight. I'll stop.
Yeah, it's all a lot of head nodding. Does anybody want to respond to anything Jack said before I move on? Okay. Leah, next question is for you. So you have said that history touches every aspect of LDF's current litigation. Can you describe how you use historical context in your cases, and also share a little bit about why you think it's important to document people's lived experience?
So one of the key claims that LDF continues to bring over its nearly 90-year history is that particular laws, whether in the voting context, the economic justice, the criminal justice, the criminal system, housing, whether they were animated by a discriminatory purpose. And the Supreme Court in Arlington Heights identified a framework for the court looking at the total evidence to adduce whether a purpose in designing a law is to harm Black people, Black individuals, communities, and so forth. And so history is a specific element of the proof that we are able to bring in order to make out those claims. So we need it to marshal evidence of history in order to try to convince a court of intentional racial discrimination. There are also particular substantive areas, like in voting, where Congress has specifically delineated that under the Voting Rights Act, if you want to show not that a law was animated by discriminatory purpose, but that is the result, regardless of the intent, that looking at the history in that particular state of voting discrimination or in that particular locality, that is relevant in the court's total analysis of whether or not a voting practice is harmful to a particular community. So two examples quickly are in Georgia after the 2020 election, there was this historic turnout of Black and other racial minority communities in that election. And immediately in response to it, the state comes in and restricts the very means that Black and other voters use to participate. That is, they restricted absentee voting, access to drop boxes. They even criminalized providing water to people in line to vote. LDF and a ton of other groups sued them, claiming intentional discrimination and that law has discriminatory results, or those series of laws have discriminatory results. And we hired an expert historian, Dr. Carol Anderson from Emory University, to look at the sum total of Georgia's history and how, in similar moments where Black voters were exercising their ability to participate, where elections like in 2020 were really close, right? The president was looking for 11,000 votes. That is when you saw states come in and try to restrict the means by which Black voters were participating. Jump to Florida. There has been a long history of people trying to pull down their felony disfranchisement scheme. And in 2018, voters changed the constitution in the state and said that most people with felony convictions should get to vote when they complete their sentence. In 2019, the legislature then comes in and says, no, to complete your sentence, you have to pay off all the fines and fees. And so we sue them and say that's intentional discrimination, because when Dr. Morgan Counselor from Caltech looked at the history, we know that felony disfranchisement is a Jim Crow remnant. We know that over many decades, there have been hundreds of pieces of legislation that were introduced that gave people notice of the harm on particular communities. There has been a history of litigation in that state to try to ameliorate felony disfranchisement. So history is important, not just in the voting context, but across all of our practice areas, particularly when we're trying to prove that the past is present, that the decision that we're challenging in this moment is part of a mosaic and a long total record of jurisdictions intentionally trying to harm Black voters. We also, I should mention, use history to build records before legislative bodies, whether that's the US Congress or state legislative bodies. And then we use that record to go in court and defend that a legislature did or did not do what was necessary to build the need for that particular law. And I looked up the 15,000 page congressional record that supported Congress's belief that particular states with some of the worst histories in our country, including North Carolina, should be subject to particular oversight by the federal government. And that record is what supported the Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act for nearly 5 decades and was one of the most successful pieces of legislation at preventing racial discrimination in voting. And that was build upon a record that Congress amassed, a particular history. So we use it in litigation, we use it in policy. And on your second piece of the question, before I turn it over to for others' perspectives, I think there are three particular ways where I personally feel that the documentation of individual people's lives matter. The first is that sometimes when we're in courts and judges want to hear from experts, and they want to hear from academics who are supposedly the experts of particular communities. Sometimes they want to breeze past what our clients have to say or what our fact witnesses have to say. It's not really relevant to what they're doing in court. And so if we run into those headwinds, I think it's important that if it's not in the litigation record, it's in another record, that the true experts of the work that we're doing and the leadership in communities, the work to change practices comes most often from community members doing the long work over a long amount of time. And we need to record that to really acknowledge what is actually happening in our community. So that's the first reason. The second is that in our country, as we all know, we tend to lift up certain people as our heroes and sheroes, and I think we have to do the work to resist that perspective being the only perspective of who are actually heroes and sheroes. So when I see Ted Shaw in the audience, or I sit next to Jack Boger, or I think about Constance Baker Motley and Julius Chambers, those are the people that our society should be celebrating. We should know who they are, know what their life looked like, and we should have that as a record because they are the people who actually transformed our world for the better. And we have an obligation, I think, to document their experiences. And then the last thing, as a lawyer at LDF, like I'm tickled to hear, Mr. Rubin, as a former LDF lawyer, talk about how he was thrown into the trenches. That is so true, and I think it's important for what we heard in the previous panel, which is we all need to realize that like we are the heroes that we're waiting for. We have to do the work that other people supposedly did in the past that had something special about them. Like we are those same people. We're just regular people, but we're committed to serving other people. We don't like the world we live in. We think it can and should be different, and we have to do it. And so for me, it's personally inspiring to see former LDF lawyers, former LDF staff, former clients, former cooperating counsels, to hear what they went through so that I can get the courage, the motivation to continue the work that I feel like I'm called to do. And I think that that has a personal resonance for people who are trying to walk in the steps of the very people who we benefited from their labor.
Thank you so much, Leah. My next question is for Danita. Will you tell us about your experience teaching the civil rights movement, both in the academy and in the community, and then thinking about the interviews you've done for the LDF project? I believe we have a clip we're going to play in a minute when you queue it up, but how you envision those interviews being useful to the movement today?
Well, thank you so much for that question. I think the first thing that I want to say is that for me, my life's work involves young people. And I believe that in order to be a good educator, which I think I am, we have to be a really good listener, and we have to be able to learn from not only elders who paved the path, but we also have to submit to and learn from young people. I think it's really important, and I love this work because what it provides is something I deeply believe in, and that is providing young people with tools and strategies that have existed before that give them maybe a way forward in the things that they're dealing with. So, for instance, I know that I've been working with the veterans of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, for about 10 years now, and we've been working on with intention, developing a playbook that young organizers can use. For me, not only is it important to document what happened, but why it happened. What I find is that understanding of history is often transient, and oftentimes, people who exist in a particular setting tend to believe and view life through the scope of what they are experiencing. And what I know as a movement person is that everything is rooted in historical context. And since we have been here specifically as Black people, we have been resisting oppression. So as an educator, it is not only how do I find those tools that I could pass on to young people, like identifying primary and secondary source documents, but looking at exactly as we were talking about earlier in the local community, because I noticed that, of course, the local community often works in tandem with the larger community. I too am so honored to be in the same space with people like Attorney Shaw and Ms. Generator McLean, who really have a historical container that young people can activate their, the scope of their work through the lens that they are coming with. So for me, it's really, really important to take a little piece of each of the interviews that I've been blessed to be a part of and think about how we can incorporate those into the toolkit that young people might need to further what they're trying to do. So when I was interviewing Ambassador Andrew Young, I went to some of the SNCC folks, and it was really interesting because Andrew Young came out of that Black Baptist tradition in the 50s, but he's about 10 years younger than a lot of the folks who set that course in the 40s and early 50s. But he was about 10 years older than the SNCC folks. So I find that particular piece of history really interesting because you have litigators. You know, a lot of people don't contextualize the fact that when the students at the illustrious and indomitable North Carolina A&T, when the students from A&T did the movement that they did, it was in 1960. That was the beginning of the decade. So prior to that, there was all this litigation strategy that went on in the 50s that really kind of supported the work for the 60s. And there's a natural generational conflict because you had all these young cats getting arrested and using all the good attorneys from the 50s, you know, after they got arrested. So it was a joy to be able to pair those histories together and ask some of the SNCC folks, what kind of questions do you think that I should ask Ambassador Young? And watch him kind of go back in time when we get those questions that are formed by historical context. So what I learned from Ambassador Young is the ways in which Black women in particular were thinking about education. They were thinking about what would happen after the schools were desegregated. From what Leah was sharing, I really thought about Elizabeth Horton Chef, who I believe is watching. So hey, take a chat if you watch. And what I learned from her is her deep tie to the community and how community is informed and the community holds memory. And so if we are going to do any type of political strategy, any kind of litigation strategy, we have to be connected to the people who are impacted by whatever it is that we're studying. And I think that she is a stalwart in the community. And I think she's a great example of somebody who has confidence enough to say, I want to be a partner in this and not just somebody who is the subject of this work. I also really appreciated so much my interaction with Janelle Bird Chichester, who is so deeply connecting history and education to the Legal Defense Fund. You know, for those initial, the initial impetus of the Legal Defense Fund, of course, was also inclusive of education and how all of her advocation is really centered in trying to make sure that those connections of education are rooted in there too. I will also say that Charles C. Ralston was a joy to talk with because he was one of the framers of those strategies. And we need those strategies right now because a lot of people think that we're in the dark. But those folks from those generations remind us that Black folks couldn't even vote. Forget about the supermajority. Black people couldn't even vote. And what did we use? He taught me always look at the numbers, look at the data and statistics, because they don't lie. Whenever you make it a case, make sure that you put that in. That's very valuable to me. Lastly, I will say that Mr. Jerome Boykin is just a giant, phenomenal warrior for our generation. He's deeply rooted in the community. all his work is informed by the community. And in terms of the strength and fortitude at which he approaches every social justice interaction he is with, he does not back down. He's a really strong person. And what I really loved about getting some of these stories from him is that he gets his story from his mother, for sure. You know, he was one of the people to integrate the place where he's from. And I resonated that with, I see my parents here who are movement people, and I come from a long line of movement people, and so does Neil Burchester, and so does Jerome Morgan. And when he told me about his mother and how insistent she was that people kept up the good fight, how she organized the community and did patrols to make sure those kids were protected, it really resonated with me about some of the narratives we've been given about being docile and how history didn't just happen to us. We were active participants and we were very much in opposition to things going on. And I think that resistance is something that we should study too. So it's important to look at why, what were circumstances, and not just what happened. And I think this clip will share a little bit about what his mother was facing and where he gets some of his strength from.
Thank you, Julia. While we're doing that, Jerome Boykin is also Leah's client in a more recent voting rights case.
After that. I see how to go. So here's a young perhaps low, but he would think with probably 30 kids in class that it would be loud enough for everyone to hear. And just, you know, sitting there and being there and stuff like that, and they wouldn't speak to you. You basically was on your own. Even the teacher said little to you, didn't say much.
Did this continue throughout the school year, or did it get better?
It got better for us making friends with some of the white kids that would call you in word, some of the white kids that would fight with you. Experience that. There were so many white kids that would want to fight you and say ugly stuff to you. It wasn't the whole school, but it was so many you would think it was the whole school. It was just that many. And as time went on, some of the white kids end up becoming friends with you, liking you a little more the way it was to call you. The two people that we had voice to me, some of them come in on our side.
You mentioned the controls that, was that folks in the neighborhood?
Yeah, it was my mother was good, my father and the other two kids, parents, daughters Brown and Noel and Douglas. The parents would take turns and just control the school, and they never stopped his parents to see exactly what was going on.
Things that they want to encourage you to be that situation.
Well, she didn't tell me that. I was too young to really fully understand. And that one day that I understand what was going on. I didn't want to go to school. I think who would want to go to school under those circumstances? So as a kid, you know, I would tell them, Mom, like that school, and calling the names and all. And I don't wanna go to that school. And she would say, listen, you have to go to that school. So you might as well make up your mind. This have to happen. I know you're young, you don't understand, but one day you will. And the purpose of sending you to that school is to make it better for everybody.
And only play the second half of that clip, but I'm glad that we had a technical difficulty, because I think it's good to hear more from Mr. Boykin. Anybody wanna react to that before we move on? I think there's a lot of things we've already been talking about. My next question is for Carla. So Carla, thanks to your leadership, we recently launched LDF Recollection, Civil Rights Legal Archive. Hopefully everybody's already gone to the website by now, ldfrecollection.org, where thousands of documents for the LDF archives are publicly available for the first time. What's your vision for Recollection, and why does it include narrative pieces in addition to the searchable archival records? And also, what are your hopes for the Oral History Project and for Recollection?
Thanks, Kayla. So coming on to this project, I had the opportunity to step into leading a brilliant team of archivists. And one of the things that is really guiding my vision for the website is this piece on intergenerational wisdom, that sharing our collective history and our past through storytelling is really important. And I go back to when I was 7 years old, and the documentary, the PBS documentary, Eyes on the Prize, was playing in my living room. We talked about in the last panel what happens around the dinner table. And at 7 years old, I didn't have the words for structural inequities or what it actually meant to be a civil rights lawyer. But I knew that I wanted to be a part of a community that didn't just see the world and accept it or refuse to accept the world as it is, and fought to build what it could be. And that's the vision that I have for this website, that intergenerationally we'll be able to facilitate conversations. And I have a picture up here that I want to show, because when I had that vision to become a lawyer back when I was 7 years old, I couldn't have imagined then that I would clerk for Judge Damon J. King, and that the first law clerk that he had was Lonnie Bonnier. And Jim Coleman was my professor at Duke Law School. He might be online watching now. And this is one of our first pieces, editorial pieces that we wrote, because we released the files of Lonnie Bonnier when she was a voting rights attorney at LDF. And again, this picture is very powerful because it's 3 generations: the judge, Professor Coleman, Lonnie Bonnier, and then I'm sitting here because of them. I am here in this position, and I couldn't have dreamed that I would become a law professor. Professor Coleman inspired that in me, or Lonnie Bonnier was the first Black tenured woman at Harvard Law School who paved the path for me to be able to walk and sit where I am now. And so when I came onto the team, it wasn't just a vision to finish Recollection, but to create something that is enduring, to create something that inspires law students. And this isn't just a photo, it's a lineage. It's a reminder that the law is just not a doctrine, that it's a tradition, it's passed down intergenerationally through mentorship, through scholarship, and at its core, fierce love of our people. And I know that I came in to lead the Thurgood Marshall with this lineage on my shoulders. And my charge was to amplify the voices that are shown in the oral histories and make it resonate beyond law libraries, to go into classrooms, as Jesse mentioned, at courtrooms, communities. And so that's what the Recollection editorial piece is about. Yes, it's a searchable archives and it features editorial content, but it's a platform for long form essays, narrative biographies, that bring these stories to life. And so next week we'll be releasing a new piece on student protest, and it focuses in on the oral history part of the website. And I want to show a brief clip of James Ferguson. His story and the story that will be released next week really brings together this intergenerational wisdom, especially when we think about his beginnings in Asheville as segregated school and how that motivated him to become a civil rights attorney.
We were able to make contact with some of the students that we knew and some white adults in the community. And then we contacted either the store owners or the lunch counter managers at several stores in Asheville as a result of our study of the nonviolent movement. And that is, you don't just go create a sit-in or whatever, confrontation. You first identify the problem, then you meet with those who might be able to resolve the problem. And then ultimately, if you weren't successful in getting the problem addressed, you would do direct action, sit-ins or demonstrations or whatever you needed to do. But as it turned out, when we identified the problem and sought to negotiate with those, the white store owners or lunch counter managers or whatever, it turned out that they agreed, after some negotiation, that they agreed to serve us. I say us, the black students, black people. So we showed up at the appointed time with the understanding that we would actually be served. And that's how the lunch counters got desegregated in Asheville.
So it's very powerful for especially young people to know and to see themselves in the oral history. James Ferguson started as a student. Marion Wright Edelman, who was at the Legal Defense Fund in Mississippi, started as a student at Spelman, and Bill Robinson joined LDF after the Freedom Summer. So the post that will come out next week, focusing on student protests, that allows people to see themselves through the oral histories. And recollection is an offering to the next generation to let them know that you're not alone, you're part of something bigger, and that this is an intergenerational fight for freedom. And so my hope and vision for this website is that just like me, the 7-year-old girl, sitting and watching Eyes on the Prize with my family, that people will come to the website, engage with the Brown versus Board of Education curriculum, see one of the oral histories, and realize I can be a part of this too. And so that's my dream, is that this is a legacy that we're carrying forward, and to start that intergenerational conversation and bring it to present day, bring it to life.
Jack Boger's interview, I believe, also has a story about participating in a protest as a student in the 60s. Y'all have to go watch the interview to hear that. My last question is for Renee. So glad that you're part of this project now, just because you help us think expansively about how these interviews might be used and activated. Can you talk about your students' creative works based on oral history interviews and help us imagine what a creative activation of one of the LDF interviews might look like?
One of the things that makes me really excited about all of this, so I'm a performance studies trained scholar. I'm a person who often needs to, I started off as a poet. And I loved the ability to put
give words back to the bodies they come from. And so part of what my classes do, I teach a class around oral history and performance. And in that particular class, we often have two primary goals. The first goal is to teach the students how to do oral history work, and they learn by doing. They learn the theories of oral history. They're able to get a sense of the techniques of oral history research. And then one of the ways we've done it in the past, and I'm excited about having this project and having this archive to get to share with the students. So I'll walk through what I've done in a similar project and what I'm looking forward to getting to do playing with this one. I, as a person who was here at UNC in the 1990s, I'm a double UNC grad. I was here when the Institute of African American Research first started. And so 2 years ago, when the Institute of African American Research and the Sonia Haynes Stone Center for Research in Black Culture and History combined, I was really worried that having been here and seen the struggles for both, that history and memory would be collapsed, or in story would be collapsed in a way that would cause erasure. So I knew I wanted to do something around oral history and the Institute of African American Research at that time. So we took that on in the performance of oral history class. It meant that in addition to learning the tools and techniques, we then identified who the main narrators would be for the Institute for African American Research project. The students rehearsed and learned how to even approach potential narrators and do that work. They did the contextual work to understand when their people were here, what they accomplished while they were here, what was going on in the broader world. But that still was a different distance. It was what those folks did back then at some other way distant time, and the work the students were doing right now in the classroom to get a grade. When they started having more connection to the individuals when they got to do the actual interviews, but in performance, they then got a chance working in groups of 3 to 5. They did the interviews that way, and then they went back to review the interviews, to look at themes, to tag and code them according to themes. The students then there were 5 groups of students who each uplifted one interview that they did. And the way that they did this through performance was, after doing the work of seeing what these themes are, they had to create script performances using the original transcripts. And in scripting those performances, they needed to separate the voices between their bodies on the stage. And one of the key rules for how to do this work is they could not sensationalize. Meaning, if a narrator said something to them that they sparked around. Let's say the narrator's main goal in talking to them was about the day Martin Luther King, Jr. died. Was killed. But something in the story, because they were talking about witnessing it on the balcony of Morrison Dorm, and something they said about Morrison Dorm and slipping as they walked back really got the students' attention, right? They cannot focus on something that they are interested in that way, that the narrator did not focus on themselves. They have to really listen. It's a way to get them to listen deeply. And so one layer of listening is why I like listening to going back and listening to oral history student transcripts. Because you learn something different when you listen again, and then you have to listen again to kind of keep getting it right. Well, the students have to do that multiple times, and then they have to script it, and then they have to perform it from the first person perspective. So it also gives them a sense of empathy. Because something that happened that seemed as if, and oftentimes for them, it happened in black and white. People were walking around the world either in faded color or in black and white. They weren't even in full color yet. All of a sudden, it's now personal. It's I. And they go through the process, they do these performances, and then they write journals about the performances. And part of their journal reckoning with the performance is not only what did they learn, what did they know now that they wouldn't have known at the beginning of the process, what did the performance itself do?
Then the students take those individual performances and looking at the things that they pulled out of the individual ones, they script a collective performance. So they did that with the 5 interviewees, finding common themes, and then scripting what we call either a dialogic or a collage performance that pulls those different parts together. And one of the things I find really beautiful and illuminating about that is not only what the students get out of doing it, but when we invite narrators in to witness it for themselves, they see things that they didn't realize sometimes came up in multiple interviews. They hear the ways the students emphasize certain aspects, you know, and part of that emphasis, we tell them that if a narrator, an interviewee was really leaning in and emphasizing something that was important in the moment, that might be something they say orally. So instead of hearing it just from one voice, now you're hearing it from multiple voices. Or you might hear it repeated if the interviewee really repeated it multiple times, but you get it with the emphasis of their bodies and you get it with the emphasis of their collective voices. And so it, one, creates an opportunity to amplify so that people aren't just kind of reading the transcripts on the page. They get to engage with it in real time through these, you know, body to body. And that part of storytelling, I think, is really important in terms of, you know, we've talked about this notion of intergenerational storytelling. It makes people who are engaging in this whole process care in a different kind of way because they have the voices on their bodies. When they do it for an audience and they see the audience's response, they have a different sense of responsibility and pride with that work. And so I'm looking forward to engaging this material, giving students an opportunity to witness the first layer of art that they'll see with it, which is, you know, Jesse's documentary work with. That's already a layer of art, you know, that they're engaging with. They get to engage with the voices, the stories, the context, and then think about what they make of it and how it may relate to something that's happening in their lives right now. And I know we need to shift to the question and answer, so this is the other little part that I'll say. I just want to give this quick reflection. One of the most powerful moments I saw, this is now a class that's listed at with the general education requirement. So prior to that, I got students who were interested in either oral history, so they self-selected, or they were interested in the subtopic of the class. And in the last class's case, that meant something about the Institute of African American Research. But because it was a general ed requirement, sometimes students just signed up because it was something to check off. So I had a student who didn't seem all that engaged for the majority of the class. Like, was going through the motions, was just not seeming all that kind of tied in. Got a little bit more tied in after engaging in the interview. Started participating more in the performance work, you know, getting the performance ready to be seen. But what was really impactful was watching that student do the collective performance in front of an audience and having to speak some of those words. And this is a white male student who was speaking about segregation. And in the question and answer period afterward, what he said was he had gone through over the course of the class a transformation for himself. He'd come from a family and in an area where he hadn't had a lot of interaction with, Black people, and he had a certain perception of what some of those interviews might be like before doing them. But after he did them, and then after he had to speak some of what he had to speak, including desegregating, certain schools, it was a similar story to this one. It was actually part for that student of, I can't remember which of the interviews he was from, but it was part of segregation. That it changed the way he thought. It changed the way he thought about not only Black people, but some of the history of people of color on this campus and institutional memory and their contributions to it. As a matter of fact, Anna Elliott, who is one of our field scholars right now, was in that class, and it's a class that bridges both undergraduate and graduate students. So I think the sense of empathy, responsibility, and personal connection are some of the things performance can do.
Beautiful, thank you, Renee. All right, we will now take some questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, you can raise your hand and we will bring you the mic. Also, is anybody monitoring the Zoom? Do you have any questions on? Oh, I thought that, all right, can somebody?
I'm happy to take a mic too. Is that you, James?
That would be me.
Okay. I exercised it today. James is with the local NAACP chapter. Is it Orange and Carver? James, oh, Chapel Hill Carver. All right, well, here you are.
Thank you. This has been a very rich and inspiring discussion. And I think acknowledging the value, the importance of stories and narratives and knowing what came before. And later, I had the privilege of hearing Elizabeth Hinton, Professor Hinton, speak at Duke 2 or 3 months ago. And she talked about sort of the very thing that you were talking about, the importance of going into archives and finding information to support, issues of today. And she also mentioned one of the cases that you didn't mention that she talked about was here in North Carolina, and the case related to the right of people who've been formally convicted to vote, and using history and historians to help make that case. And so I think it's so important that we acknowledge that we inform others of that, and it is inspirational for young people to have a sense that it is not all lost, that things were even worse at other points in time, and there were folk like some of the very folk that you're talking about who found a way. And this thing about, there's no us without them, I think is something, I don't know who said it, but it resonates with me. And so you're closing that loop, and thank you. And I look forward to listening to these stories of people who are my heroes and who've lit my path for decades. So thank you.
That was you. Hello, my name is Kristen Ruiz. I'm the Development Director for the Pauline Warner Center of History and Social Justice. And given the moment that we're in right now, I'm curious about how all of you are able to or already do use the skills that you have to help to uplift smaller, like cultural institutions with what you already do. So like Pauline was a lawyer, also a poet, a writer. So I see a lot of congruence with listening to everything that you've shared today. So I'm curious about how you kind of interact with small cultural institutions, especially around North Carolina with your work.
I want to share that, first it's a great question. I think in the moment that we're in right now, this is the path forward. I listened to what Renee said, and I really want to uplift the role that the artistic community has played in the movement. And we don't, I think, give enough shine to that. But I think when times are bleak like this, it's a way that we can express ourselves. I think as Black women, this is a time we need to heal ourselves, kind of be in the cut and express and be able to transform some of the historical notions of what we're in a way that breeds artistry. And I just want to say, I work with Judy Richardson, who did Eyes on the Prize. She was a part of the Eyes on the Prize movement, and she'd be so happy to hear some of the things that you said, because at the end of the day, I know that the Smith folks do what they do. John O'Neill, a performer, when people did plays around the country to talk about what was going on, they were dealing with literacy. They were dealing with literacy and the rate at which people were educated and tried to interpret what was going on around them. And I think that we're in a moment right now where that is one aspect that cannot be controlled by anyone, is the way that we express ourselves and come together collectively. And lastly, I would say I'm just so grateful for this program. I'm so grateful for this interaction. And I would say that relationships are something that we really need to explore a little bit more when it comes to working in the community and working with each other, because it's those relationships that also sustain us and act as information sources. I worked with Insay Ufat, who worked with Stacey Abrams with that the Georgia 2020, and we had I was fortunate to convene a panel of litigators, historians, and activists in 2015. We're talking about like the election, and we have continued those relationships throughout. And artists are a part of that, artists and archivists. Last couple of years, we had a gathering with archivists. This information is so important, but how we transfer that information, how we share that information, I contend is even more important than the history itself. Because I think what we've learned is the power of the narrative. Whether it's true or whether it's false, it is very, very powerful. So I hope the next arm is to think about how we can build those relationships, how we can deal with local communities, local institutions, and pour into them, and build our power and work in tandem with national efforts. So thank you for that question.
Kayla, we have one more question over here. Leah, go ahead. You wanna do that? You wanna do one last one? I just wanted to say that we're at the beginning of this project. So we launched the website in October, and we're looking to have conversations and build relationships with people, because it's through those relationships that we will get these stories out, that we will be able to share what the work that LDF has done. So I welcome anyone to reach out, because we want to make sure that we are amplifying these voices, that we're working in community with people, working with school districts, so that they can access the materials. And one of the great things about this archives is that it's public and available to all. So I'm gonna say this, contact me and we'll talk about how we can work together.
Kayla, one more quick question. I'm sorry, and that was Carla, of course. We have something in there.
Hey everyone, a great panel. I think it was Leah that mentioned we need to focus on who the heroes and sheroes are and what sort of makes a hero. And I was wondering if anybody wanted to share who their heroes or sheroes are in the law, and why that person is a hero or shero to you. What makes someone a heroic person in the law, someone to be admired and looked up to.
Well, it's hard not to mention the name of Julius Chambers when you ask that question, for 1,000 reasons. Both his a million, 1,000 times 1,000. Both for his brilliance, but his quiet, steady, unrelenting dedication to the work. He came back to North Carolina to start his law practice with Stein and others in Charlotte, to Jim Ferguson, at a time when there was such hostility around the state to every effort to desegregate. His office was bombed, his home was bombed. He was down in Eastern North Carolina and his car was bombed, and apparently Julius, always mild-mannered, came out and said, "I needed a new car anyway, this is okay." But he argued some of the great cases of in areas of employment and voting and school desegregation, led the legal defense fund for a time, and yet he never ever lost the common touch. One quick story: I was working with a group of lawyers in 2003. We're going to meet with Julius in Charlotte to talk about some strategy, big strategy for public education. And we went out to the lobby to go out to lunch. And there was an older black woman just sitting over in the corner. And Julius said, wait a minute, let me go over there. And he went over to this young older woman and said, why are you here, man? She said, I'm looking for Lawyer Chambers. And he said, I'm Lawyer Chambers. And she said, what do you hear about? She said, my son has got some special needs and they're locking him in the closet at school every day. And he's in the closet for 3 or 4 hours. Without any hesitation, Julius said, come on, you're going to lunch with us. And all those lawyers who'd flown in from New York and everywhere else, he was going to lunch with her as well. That's who he was. So, my hero forever.
I mean, I would say the same thing. I had the fortune of working with Chambers, who I would refer to him as, at the beginning of my career, and I would see the people who would crisscross the state to sit outside to try to meet with him, and to see him never turn people away, and even if he couldn't help, offering, call this person, see if this person can help you. I really carry that with me in our work because of the Legal Defense Fund. You know, we have a particular mission, we have a particular set of resources or particular issues that we are gonna work on, but we can't help everyone and respond to everything. But I learned from him to give someone another person to call, another way to get the support that they need, and that is something I'll carry with me. So I would lift him up. There are also, you know, there are heroes and sheroes who walk amongst us. So when I think about some of our cooperating counsel, the Ron Wilsons of Louisiana, a great son of Louisiana, the Bill Quigley's, a great son of Louisiana, Archie Bird of Arkansas, Geraldine Sumter here of North Carolina. I mean, these are people that I really identify with as sheroes, but they're also human beings who I know just toil away at the law and have this work day in and day out without the sunshine on them most of the time, who take the hits of the defeats that they have in relationship to their clients, but then they still remain joyful and generous and willing to help, even if they're exhausted and tired and are not paid for it. And to me, they have been sources of such inspiration and counsel and guidance along my career, and those are the people whose lives I want to have because they have been lives of service, but they're also still just fun, joyful people. They have fun little hobbies and fun little quirks, and they have fun stories, and they refuse to let the bitterness and hatred of white supremacy consume them and consume how they live in this world and treat other people. And I feel it's one of the blessings of this work to do it alongside them, and then that's also true of our clients. I mean, it's just like, how have they not given up? And that is such a remarkable example to have in your life day in and day out when this stuff is just really hard and it's unrelenting and it's frankly not changing fast enough and it's not gonna change in our lifetime. But knowing that you can do it better and you can lead a life of dignity and service is just such a gift that I feel like we all have in this Oral Archives, is lifting up those examples of how you should walk in this world.
As we're rounding up, I wanted to return just for one moment to this question about how do we help each other, right? And I think that one of the things that excites me to get to be a part of the Southern Oral History Program is these kinds of moments. And I think that these kinds of moments give us an opportunity not to look around and ask what someone else might be able to do for me, but what can we do for each other, right? How do we get to work, with each other? We've enjoyed, with the Southern Oral History Program, working with the Polly Murray Center on a couple of different projects, and I think that this is a moment that demands we understand we have more power than we think we do, and that we own more resources than we think we do. And so sometimes coming together, thinking about, as you all were talking, as we were listening to the first panel, my brain was already going like, I know I'm going to talk, I need to have a lunch with Jesse, I have some plans on a separate project. But I think that as we make time to listen to each other around with a spaciousness of how can we tie our little boats together? How can we support each other in ways that help us all win?
I think we do it, and I think that's important.
I have one more thing that I would be remiss if I did not look at the name of Floyd McKissick. Floyd McKissick was such an incredible strategist in this local area. He was one of the attorneys that represent my father, and Justice Marshall also weighed in. So it was like Floyd McKissick and Julius Chambers were such huge names around this way, and I think I resonate with Floyd McKissick so much, also because of the unabashed, unapologetic activism and the local organizing that he was a part of. And I think that just speaks to all of us. I want y'all all to know that I'm such a fan of the work that y'all do. I think a lot of times people who protest get like the banners, but the people who are, giving up dinners with their families to be in the cut to do all this work, these are people that are heroes to me and to younger people who are doing this work right now, who say, let's make an archive. Let's see what we can do to pull this stuff together. History will record your work too. And so I just want to thank the Southern Oral History Project. I want to thank everybody, Mel, Jesse with his brilliance, everybody who has contributed to this project. I want us to know that we are on this historical continuum too. And history will record it. We did everything we could in this moment to bring all of the stuff into fruition that our ancestors have dreamed about. So.
All right, I think that's a great way to end. Please join me in thanking our panelists. I think we have about, a 10-minute break, 5-minute break before.
Let's split it in the middle and say 7. So if you guys want to take a break, and then please do not miss our keynote, please, with Ted Shaw, with Janae Nelson, she's here. Of course, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome, welcome. Good to see you. And we're better to have you. Thank you, Culinary Center. Thank you. We're thinking of you as you guys are going through what you're going through right now. As we're all trying to just pull it together. So come on out, have refreshments, and in 7 minutes we'll be back in here for the keynote. Thank you.
Okay. Well, but yeah, where do you want to put it? Where do you want? Look at the group photo. Group photo we can do.
This scoot, so I might scoot over.
Okay.
But go ahead and do the photo and I'll
Okay.
work on that. We'll get the photos.
Is it Friday? We got something or?
Are you at the board meeting?
Yeah, I'm trying to come to the, yeah, I'll be there.
Then I'll see you there.
And I want to see how your stuff is
I
going.
wanted to reach out to you, so I'll see you on Friday. I'll talk
Okay,
to you.
for sure.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
I can always switch them out anyway. A little more too, yeah. Not all of that. Of all the people. Oh my goodness. Been last year. Very.
Outside.
February. Oh, okay, yeah, right. Yeah, it's been really great being down here in the drought. We were much more. Yeah. Yes. And we can scoot it a little bit.
I can't go far, but
Yes.
got it. Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
Because we can,
Oh.
but like it makes it.
Oh, got it.
So maybe out of the way, but.
She was on, she gave my house to me, she said, look at this, she said.
We relocated. I don't think so. I think we're actually gonna. Okay, you did. I didn't know if I needed to. They say
Wait, are they, if they're not open, that doesn't like these are open. Do they have times? Yeah. If you promise, like, you know, it is done deal. Yeah.
You and relay. So, but, you are studying, no, sorry, I took a class at because also, oh, there is no, so I'm in. I'm. Oops, okay. And then I like to do this, notifications. I looked at American historic sites and how they perform. So, sort of, yeah, like that might be yeah, right.
Okay, but I was just. There. Like for the. That is very fast, yeah. Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to leave this, how to, it doesn't like go to sleep.
Your screen, go to display.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's not necessary. Screensaver or sleep? Yeah, let's try. I don't know, maybe we'll just hope for the best here. Cause it'll only happen if something, you know, it's there for a while. Yeah.
And she needs it the whole time. Just for internal, right?
Yeah, okay. Do you need it for your part? You have to, that hasn't changed, right? Okay, okay, so it's just the beginning, so it's just Renee that needs it.
Exactly.
Wow. So Renee, is here, or the keynote, I don't know, but I know, current version.
Okay,
Right here.
so I should tell Renee that that's where it's
Yeah.
here? Yes. Okay, I'll let her know.
Or I'm not saying.
Hey, Phil, oh, so Phil, we are doing lobs, right?
Yeah, honestly, whatever.
No, I think lobs are good. Then they don't have to worry about it.
That's fine.
I think it's just only Renee's part. To my knowledge, yeah. That's Renee. Okay.
That's fine, or better.
I'm gonna go check.
So Kim, you speak, all the way down to, and we don't want to get into. And we have, the batteries are still.
I'm just gonna grab a chair so I can.
We know that. I feel like-
I think we're almost ready for you.
That's all right. I see that. I saw, I got it. So I know.
That's how I know we have, that's how I know everybody is. But other than that, I don't care what they don't know. Watch a game, though, I do whatever.
Go ahead and take a seat. Go ahead and take a seat.
Where do y'all want?
And you got the memo that the. I did, but it's on the. So there was. So now we're gonna be working on this one. It's, okay, sorry.
Let me just make it bigger for my fingers. I'll put a 14.5 and into 10. Yeah.
You could double
space.
I
You could double space, that's
yeah.
awesome. We're gonna set. Yes, sir. Get this.
You are all colorful here. And so we gotta get a good photo.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah. So we'll be at Chris has.
This took about 5 minutes. I think we kind of got it.
Yeah, that's not.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes. It was there was 6.
I should stay over here in case I need to log in. Because it's just for Renee's thing, so she can put it over there. So she can what? So she can put it. Yeah, I mean, she's right at the beginning, right? Yeah. It should be fine. It's not 48%. It should be fine.
Good evening, everyone. While we are waiting, rather than me bringing the mics to you, we thought we'd do something a little different during the Q&A. So we have these index cards, we have some pins, and we'll bring them around. Just raise your hands and we'll give those over to you, and we'll be starting in just a few minutes.
Anyone else need an index card? You'll write your questions on here. Okay. The total phone, yeah, my phone. This is the phone I have. Someone does have it. I just don't know where. Okay, as long as it's, oh, I think I see it over there. Okay, they're good, yeah.
So we'll get ready to get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Renee Alexander Craft, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm the director of the Southern Oral History Program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I want to welcome you to Defend, Disrupt, Dream: Untold Stories in LDF's 85-year fight for dignity and humanity. Our keynote conversation as we wrap up our Legal Defense Fund Day at the SOHP Spring 2025 Symposium. The partnership between LDF and SOHP on the LDF Oral History Project is fitting for the SOHP. It's fitting that SOHP has for 5 decades been capturing and elevating voices that have often been silenced in the historical record. LDF is celebrating 85 years of championing the rights and dignity of all Americans in the courtroom, including the U.S. Supreme Court. SOHP, as part of the Center for the Study of the American South, is honored to work with LDF in collecting, preserving, and sharing the stories of key battles for civil rights in our nation. Earlier today, our 2 afternoon panels discussed the mechanics of developing LDF's Oral History Project. Panelists also discussed creative ways to use and teach with oral history collections. Tonight, our keynote conversation between Janae Nelson and Ted Shaw takes a close look at what civil rights means in the present moment and how storytelling can engage and enhance our understanding of how LDF has responded to and shaped American history in the most contentious and transformative times. They will also discuss the challenges LDF faces during this critical time in our nation's history. There will be a 15-minute Q&A after our keynote. And as we said earlier, we passed around those cards so that if you have any thoughts, any questions as the night goes on, please write them down and we'll collect them up. Our facilitator for this evening's conversation is Professor Meredith Clark. Meredith D. Clark calls herself a recovering journalist. She's an associate professor of race and political communication in the Huston School of Journalism and Media here at UNC. Her book, we tried to tell y'all, Black Twitter and the Rise of Digital Counterpublics, was released earlier this year. Professor Clark earned her bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in journalism from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. She has a PhD in mass communication from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Clark is driven by her belief that everyone has a story to tell. Tonight, she will focus on the stories the NAACP Legal Defense Fund has to tell. Please welcome Professor Clark, Janae Nelson, and Ted Shaw. I'm happy to introduce you to our guests this evening. Their full bios are in your program. They are Janae Nelson, President and Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the nation's premier civil rights law organization, fighting for racial justice and equity. Prior to joining LDF in June 2014, Nelson was Associate Dean for Faculty Scholarship and Associate Director of the Ronald H. Brown Center for Civil Rights and Economic Development at St. John's University School of Law, where she was also a full professor of law and served the law school's senior leadership team. She is a renowned scholar for voting rights and election law. Ted Shaw is the Julius L. Chambers Distinguished Professor of Law and the Director of the Center for Civil Rights at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Shaw teaches civil procedure, election law, and social justice lawyering. His research areas include the 14th Amendment, affirmative action, and housing policies regarding fair housing. In 1982, Shaw joined the staff of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, or LDF. He worked at LDF for over 26 years, including litigating cases related to elementary, secondary, and higher education, housing, voting rights, and capital punishment. He also directed LDF's education docket. In 2004, Shaw became LDF's 5th Director Counsel. Shaw previously taught at the University of Michigan Law School, Columbia University School of Law, SUNY School of Law at Queens College, and Temple Law School. He's currently a faculty member of the Practicing Law Institute. Ted was the 2024 recipient of LDF's Thurgood Marshall Lifetime Achievement Award. To kick off the keynote, here's a short video about Ted Shaw's extraordinary career.
That I thought when I finally met Ted was that he is as much a gentleman as a fierce racial justice advocate.
I would say he's humble and he's hopeful.
Everybody knew as Teddy. And Teddy Shaw, everybody knew was like, he was a superstar.
He's a person who even when we were young, and in law school, Mark was somebody I knew was gonna be special. He was strong in what he believed and clear in what he was trying to move forward with. He had a warmth and dedication to the importance of civil rights and impact on ordinary people.
Yeah, to his core, social justice, legal right.
I went to law school because I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer. And as far as I was concerned, there were two places that were the best places to work. One was the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, and the other one was the Legal Defense Fund. I was blessed to get a phone call from Jack Greenberg. He simply said, wondering if he would want to come up to New York and talk about working at the Legal Defense Fund. And my heart leapt.
I knew he was coming to LDF, and I joked him, I called him a refugee for justice. I said, we're lucky to get you here. And it's the whole package. He could be deployed into any litigation environment and excel.
He had done employment work and education work, he had done voting work and criminal justice work. He understood what the through lines were. And he was also somebody who was pioneering the intersection of civil rights and human rights.
We still live in a very race-conscious society. The whole notion of color blindness, in my view, is mistaken. The question is, whether we see color. The question is what significance it has. The question is how we treat each other once we've seen it. We ought to be talking about racial fairness, justice, and equity.
If you look back at all the things that he has done, all the things that he has been involved in, he is truly a consequential civil rights lawyer.
I mean, one of the most important things Ed Shaw did when he was director counsel was to lead the coalition of civil rights groups to get the Voting Rights Act of 1965 reauthorized.
This is the most sacred right, the right to vote. We ought to be moving toward making it easier for people to participate with citizens in the political process, not fencing them out.
Without a Voting Rights Act of 1965, without the work Teddy did, you probably would not have Barack Obama as president of the United States when they were appointed as attorney general of the United States.
All of his cases were important, but I think one of his greatest was Grant versus Michigan. It's pretty important framing back the case in 2003.
Ed had represented the coalition of Black and Hispanic students that intervened in that lawsuits.
We prevailed in the Michigan case in another quarter of a century, basically.
We at least were able to extend the affirmative action in this country for the next 20 years.
He has shaped the field of civil rights, sometimes fighting really lonely battles.
He has inspired a generation of lawyers to deliver justice in the unique way that he does.
Ted told me I want to spend part of my career building the next generation of civil rights lawyers. That's part of it, just like I said, which we were trying to pull in Chapel Hill.
Thurgood Marshall, Robert Carter, Constance Baker Model. Ted Shaw is right along with those people on the path and on of our great civil rights lawyers.
A lifetime achievement award in the name of Thurgood Marshall. Well, what do you say about that? You know, when I think about particularly my two relatives, I learned from about the civil rights struggle. She would have burst with pride so many times over because I was a legal defense fund lawyer. I just hope that I made them feel proud. I feel with pride of that.
Ted is the quintessential LDF lawyer. He is the perfect person to lift up and celebrate in this milestone year. It's a small club for people who have had the privilege and pressure of leading LDF to face all the other challenges in your life while you're taking on this enormous responsibility. Some of the moments that I've shared with Ted about that are among the most precious to me. I really want to congratulate Ted on receiving this honor.
Well, Teddy, look, I'm proud of the fact that you're getting this Thurgood Marshall Lifetime Achievement Award, but I gotta tell you, I'm not surprised. Way back when we could both play basketball, it was better than you. I didn't even admit that you're gonna be a special lawyer. You've always been a special person. And the fact that you're receiving this unbelievably prestigious award, I think is both deserved for the great work that you've done, and recognition of the kind of person you are. I love you.
The transition from. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So we've taken a brief look at Professor Shaw's personal history with the Legal Defense Fund, but we want to take some time and start out this evening by beginning with some history of the Legal Defense Fund itself. And so, Ted?
May I just mention that Janae's history with the Legal Defense Fund didn't start in 2014. And so, Janae, what was the first year that you came to LDF?
It was 2000.
2000, yeah, so it was quite a bit earlier.
Quite a bit. He's dating me, y'all. He's doing it right now.
And a pivotal year at that.
Very much so.
All right, well, let's go back to the history of the Legal Defense Fund itself. I have a sense in general that people may not understand what the NAACP Legal Defense Fund does. We may have some concept of the history of it or who benefits from its work. Can you tell us a little bit about why LDF was founded and what does the general public need to know about its impact and its reach?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say how wonderful it is to be here on the UNC Chapel Hill campus and to celebrate the partnership with the Southern Oral History Project. This is just a wonderful occasion, particularly in this moment, to talk about the importance of history and documenting the civil rights struggle that continues, right? We're making history every single day. I'm glad that we opened with that video because you asked about the history of the Legal Defense Fund, and I hope you got a glimpse of what it is, because our history is really made up of people. It's made up of the people who fought the fights, not just the lawyers, extraordinary ones like Ted Shaw, and of course our founder, Thurgood Marshall, but also our clients and our co-counsel, as Leah so eloquently described, and all the people that create what is a collaboration of justice seekers and arc vendors. And that really is what the Legal Defense Fund is. It is the first and foremost racial justice law organization in the country. We were founded in 1940 by Thurgood Marshall and a band of intrepid lawyers who somehow fought in that time period. You know, when we were coming out of the Depression, heading toward World War II, facing Jim Crow, all of these factors that would suggest that we should just hunker down and, you know, go under a cover. These folks said, we see the legal landscape, we see the social landscape, and we believe we have the wherewithal to create a legal institution that can transform this country. And a mere 14 years later, they did so in Brown versus Board of Education. So the Legal Defense Fund has 8.5 decades worth of intention and advocacy that has used the power of law, people, research, and narrative, all of which you saw here today in our oral history project, to transform conditions for Black people in this country and therefore give promise to our multiracial democracy. So in a nutshell, our work benefits the communities that we were created to serve, but also all of America. All of America has been touched by the work of the Legal Defense Fund. And I hope you get a sense of the spirit of the people it takes to do that work, as Leah described earlier, and as exemplified in the tribute to Ted, which is really only a slice of a description of the amazing human being that he is. So I hope that that gave everyone the grounding that you need to understand this critical, unique institution.
Professor Shaw, we've seen some of your work with the Legal Defense Fund. We've heard folks talk about your time with it. What would you want the general public to know about its impact and reach?
Well, first, I commend Janae Nelson. Her time at the Legal Defense Fund spans 25 years now, quarter of a century. With all due respect.
Never quite heard it put that way.
I get that, but I also want to once again lift up Jack Bogle, whom you heard on a panel, who's one of the finest human beings I know, and one of LDF's great lawyers. He led our capital punishment program. He also developed our race and poverty program, and he's just a tremendous human being. And he's accompanied by his wife Jennifer sitting over here, and I just have to lift him up. Also, Leah, your talk on the panel a few moments ago was just wonderful. It was so eloquent. And I always think about you as part of the new generation of lawyers at the Legal Defense Fund. But you also introduced yourself as part of one of the senior lawyers at the Legal Defense Fund. Those were your words, not mine. But that was just wonderful, and I just want to commend you all. Pardon me? Oh, yeah, we shared some things. And I can't resist. I remember when I shouldn't say this, but we came to Chapel Hill, went to church, and we overheard somebody saying one day, there's that light-skinned lawyer with his light-skinned wife and light-skinned children. So here they are. Lona and Dora, my older daughter, and Amalia, my younger daughter. I want to stress something. Not only was the Legal Defense Fund started in 1940, it was the first public interest legal organization. There was no such thing as a public interest law firm at that time. That's an oxymoron, or it was. And it was the first legal defense fund. Now, legal defense fund is a term that is applied to all kinds of organizations that do public interest law. That runs a gamut from other civil rights organizations, organizations that represent women, but also conservative organizations. We should have protected that term when we could have. But it was started in 1940. Can't mention the Legal Defense Fund without talking about the man who, the first director counsel was Thurgood Marshall, but the man who was the progenitor of the Legal Defense Fund was the great Charles Houston. And if you don't know about him, look him up. You should know about him. He, in many respects, created public interest law. He turned Howard Law School into a factory for civil rights law. No Charles Houston, no Legal Defense Fund, no Brown versus Board of Education, no so much, so many other things. And so I just have to lift up his name also. I'll stop there.
Well, I would imagine, we got plenty of time tonight, and I would imagine that there are some people in this oral history archive that mention Charles Houston, that mentioned the impact of Thurgood Marshall. Janae, I want to ask you about how the notion of the LDF Oral History Project came to be. And have you had a chance to review any of the interviews? Are you learning something from some of those reflections? Can you tell us a little bit about what strikes you?
Absolutely. So, the idea of the Oral History Project is a long-standing one, but it had been a notion, an idea for a very long time before we were able to get the funding to do this. And, you know, Ted brings up Charles Hamilton Houston, and we understand the importance that he plays in the entire creation of civil rights work. You know, he's the one who said a lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society. I mean, he's the one who actually threw down the gauntlet and said, what are we doing with this power, this legal knowledge that we possess, especially Black lawyers? What are we doing? So imagine if we had Charles Hamilton Houston on film, explaining what he meant, talking about the context, giving us the inspiration that we could draw on today in these moments of dire threat. And we thought about that. LDF has always valued its history and the history of the civil rights movement and has used that to propel our work, to really infuse a spirit of culture in who we are and how we do our advocacy. And we thought it was important to begin to capture those voices. And someone was saying earlier, I think it was Renee, who said, you know, you get to see the body movement, you hear the inflection and the tone, and you get to really experience it in a visceral way that is very different from just reading it on paper. And there are so many icons today who are making history and who live in the shadows. And this is an opportunity to memorialize their thinking, to ensure that we pay homage to what they've done, and to leave that as a gift of inspiration for the next generation. And there were a number of people who helped to formulate the Thurgood Marshall Institute, which this emanates out of, you know, Janelle Berg-Chichester is a former LDF attorney who originally thought of this idea of having the Thurgood Marshall Institute, an internal think tank. And then Charlotte Eichel, who I served under when I came back in 2014, who is a, you know, history lover, wanted to make sure that we brought our archives to life. And so she helped to get us the funding and helped to create and flesh out the vision for the Institute. So I definitely credit those two brilliant women with ensuring that we have this today. And then our phenomenal archives team has done the work of bringing this to life in partnership with SOHP and creating a website, Recollection, that is the house of all of this, and is truly now a online experience that we have now offered to the public.
So as part of this experience, Professor Shaw, you were interviewed for the Oral History Project. Could you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like for you and how you see your memories and your lived experience making a difference for law students and young activists today?
Yes, although it occurs to me that, Janae, maybe you should share the news about our first woman director council that we found out about yesterday.
Oh, absolutely. So Elaine Jones, who's LDF's fourth president and director council, who worked with Ted very closely. You saw her in the video. She was the one who was just elated that Ted came to LDF from the Department of Justice. She was, as Ted said, the very first woman to lead this institution. And she is someone else who I think deserves even more recognition and credit for what she's done, not only as the leader of this institution, but generally as someone who pioneered civil rights work in so many different ways. And we just found out yesterday that she was inducted into the Academy of Arts and Sciences. And so we lift her up and learn about this career. And he also someone we captured through our oral history project. So Ted can tell us what it actually felt like to be in the hot seat.
Yeah, and you know, Elaine is a force of nature. If you don't know what it means that she was inducted into the Academy of Arts and Sciences, go online and check out who some of the other inductees have been since the beginning of this country. She's in, as we say, high cotton. So be interviewed. I was interviewed at home in my sacred space, which is my study, my home library. And folks came down from LDF and did that. And it was wonderful to sit and talk about my time at LDF and the work of LDF, and to do it in that space. And you know, I have some discomfort when I watch that video, because you know, as I tell my kids all the time, I'm just another pea in a pod of life. And people say all these wonderful things about you, and that's nice up to a point. But all of the lawyers at LDF, to talk about them, not only the lawyers, to talk about the organizers who worked at LDF, people that I want you to know about. That's the wonderful thing about this project. Gene Fairfax, one of the most extraordinary people I ever knew, who was an organizer at LDF. I'm tempted to, I talk too much, and I'm tempted to tell you fully about Gene. You know, and it's not just Gene Fairfax. You know, there are other organizers who worked at the Legal Defense Fund. I'm having my senior moment. Yeah, well, you'll help me in a moment. I have CRS disease. You all know that, right? C is can't, R is remember. You know, to be able to talk about them, and the lawyers who worked at the Legal Defense Fund, obviously talking about those folks. You can't say enough about them, but to do it when I'm surrounded by the books about them, the biographies, June Shagaloff, yes, another person that you all should Google and look up, extraordinary one, who worked very closely with Thurgood, both at the NAACP and then its institutional child, now an adult, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. But to talk about all the lawyers and the cooperating attorneys that we work with, the people that whom we knew, and the clients, as you heard about earlier, those of you who had the earlier panel, these are extraordinary people. The biggest pride in my life, other than my family and my children, is that I work for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Both of us who came to the Legal Defense Fund in its early days, Jack will tell you this, it wasn't LDF then. It was known as the Inc. Fund, NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Incorporated, the Inc. Fund. My biggest dream, my fondest hope, was to work for the Inc. Fund. To have that opportunity, I can't tell you how much of that. You know, if I'm remembered for anything, I want to be remembered for that. Because it's one of the great institutions in this country, and for that matter, in the world. I've traveled a good chunk of the world now. I did work in South Africa with the Black Lawyers Association. Nelson Mandela asked us after he became president to come over and do seminars for the Black Lawyers Association on constitutional litigation, and we did. You know, multiple experiences there. Jack Greenberg pulled me into working with the Roma in Eastern Europe. You know, I remember going to Japan and being in offices of lawyers there, did civil rights work, and the proudest thing that they could say when I was in there was to pull down Jack Greenberg's Crusaders in the Court from their shelves and say, we know what he did. I could go on and on about these folks. But I won't.
Let me pick up there, because what I hear both of you talking about is legacy. And in this moment where so much history is being erased, civil rights are being challenged, I'm thinking about this executive order released March 25th about restoring truth and sanity to American history. I'm curious about what it means to preserve the LDF's history in this way. And as you mentioned, not just to be able to Google it, but to curate it so that others can access it. What does it mean to do that when so much of our history is being erased and undone?
Well, if we are learning anything from this moment, it is that we have got to be able to rely on ourselves to tell our own stories. And that is why it is so important that at the Legal Defense Fund, we're preserving our own history and that of the movement generally, because we're not subject to the whims of any administration, any political moment. We understand the value of our history and we will preserve it as such. We know what this attack is about. It's because of all the extraordinary people that Ted described, the extraordinary accomplishments against impossible odds. Those are lessons you don't want to teach a people that you are trying to subdue and subjugate. You don't want them to know that they can use the institutions that were created for their own oppression to liberate not only them, but an entire country. And that's what this history tells you. It's what it teaches you. It's what it inspires in you and compels you to want to do on your own. And that's why that history is so dangerous. So it means a lot, and especially in this moment when that history is under attack.
Nothing and no one can erase the history that we all know is the story of this country. And certainly the Legal Defense Fund sits squarely in that history, in the middle of that history. It cannot be erased, although there are those who may try to. I have to rein myself in because I'm tempted to talk about the current occupant of the White House in ways that that are not. Well, I just can't. I don't have words. But nothing about this man connects with history or truth, constitutionalism, any of the things that make our country, in spite of all of its flaws, the great country it is. We're in danger of having, the biggest danger in terms of erasure is having a lot of that history distorted and truth erased. But it can't be done. It won't be done. We mustn't let, all of us have an obligation to stand up in this moment for both truth and, as corny as it sounds, justice and constitutionalism, the best of what this country can be. And the Legal Defense Fund is a huge part of that struggle. It helped to bring this country back from its least attractive features, its moments. The United States helped to save this country. You know, the SNCC, John Lewis, you know what their motto was, to redeem the soul of America. That's what this organization is part of.
Let me ask you a further question on that. So the title of our conversation this afternoon is Defend, Disrupt, Dream. And it's drawn directly from LDF's anniversary theme. I want to ask you both how LDF is disrupting in this current moment And what does that aspect of your legacy, disruption, how does it inform the work that you're doing right now, classroom and legal institutes and with the NAACP?
So that term disrupt, has gotten a lot of currency recently and for good reason. We need to disrupt what is a, all out assault on truth, on justice, on constitutionalism. But as I said at the outset, LDF has always been disruptive and we've always gone against the grain. We've always, done what was not anticipated or intended, with the laws and the legal structure of this country. So I think our entire history is that of disruption. But in this particular moment, when we realized, which wasn't a surprise to us, we had done a lot of scenario planning, we knew all the potentialities that may come about after the November elections. And, within days of it, I had to think about how we were going to organize our work going forward. How are we going to prioritize? How are we going to hold space for the different mandates that we have? And the framework that we've been operating with since then is defend, disrupt, and dream. We will continue to defend the rights and protections that we have worked so hard to achieve and secure over 85 years. We will disrupt what we know is a hostile administration that does not have the best interests of this country at heart, and in fact is an enemy of the Constitution, an enemy of the American public. And we will also, while doing that, hold space to dream, hold space to create a vision of an America that will captivate the imagination and invite people to invest in that future, even if they feel it may not benefit them immediately, even if they feel it may cause them to have to give up something, that we can create a vision of an America that is worth that sacrifice. So that is what we do. That's how we're organizing our work. We will not allow the distractions of this moment to deny us the ability to dream. That is what has buoyed this organization for as long as it has existed. And that is to have the foresight to see beyond the obstacles and the impediments that stand in front of us.
It's what the great John Lewis talked about. I never got tired toward the end of his life of hearing him tell that story about good trouble, necessary trouble. That's what we're talking about.
So let's talk about some of the, we're gonna ask a question about the nuances in today's fight, but maybe we can hold these two questions together. So the fight that the Legal Defense Fund had from its inception up until, let's say, the last few years before the current occupant came into the White House, extends this legacy that the protection of civil rights is never over. The fight looks a little bit different now. It's more nuanced. It's got different people in it. I'm curious about how you see the differences that we are experiencing now versus the ones that Thurgood Marshall faced when LDF was created, that were faced when Brown v. Board was argued, and what we're battling with today, as well as what the historical purpose and lived history of this organization means for our country and the world, both now and in the future. So how do we hold history and the present together in a moment like this? Did you want to take that one?
Well, I think if the present moment teaches us anything, it's that the struggle for civil and human rights is never over. That every generation has to fight for civil and human rights. Every generation will have to fight to keep this country tethered to its, what it says, is, its principles. And at any moment, there are always those, who want to send us in the wrong direction, take us in the wrong direction. So this is an ongoing struggle. It's Ella Baker's words, powerfully and beautifully sung by Sweet Honey in the Rock. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. Or to put it in the words of one of the great lawyers and a member of the South African Constitutional Court, whom I had the honor of coming to know, Dikam Musaneke. I remember him sharing a South African proverb that simply said, if you want your dreams to come true, don't sleep.
Right? There's so many variations on that incredible game. I mean, when you were talking, what came to mind is, one that we may have all heard from Coretta Scott King, who said, freedom must be fought and won every generation, right? If we thought that somehow we were going to inherit the fruits of the labor of the fighters of the civil rights movement and just kick back in a lawn chair and not have to do anything to pay it forward to the next generation, we are, arguably the most selfish generation that ever existed, right? But I know that's not us. I know that those of us who are here and investing in preserving our history, investing in, fighting the good fight, getting in good trouble, understand that assignment, understand that this is a generational, perpetual struggle when we exist in a country that was founded on genocide, that was founded on the enslavement of Black people. With that at our roots, we can't assume that there's ever a moment where we can go to sleep. I'll quote the great poet Nas. Sleep is the enemy of death. Or I think I said that right. The point is, we cannot sleep, and that is really a testament to the active work that LDF has been doing in this moment. And you asked a question about, how we are disrupting in this moment. How are we executing on this vision? And I'm proud to say that our team has been absolutely on fire. I mean, I could not be more proud of how we have been meeting this moment, as challenging and difficult as it is. We already have nearly as many lawsuits against the Trump 2 administration in fewer than 100 days as we had in all 4 years of the first Trump administration. Yes. But we're not playing any games. Fool me once. Yes, I mean, many of us were a little taken aback at the Trump 1 administration, but we understood the assignment. We read Project 2025, our Thurgood Marshall Institute digested it and talked about what it would mean for Black communities. And we predicted so many of the outcomes that we're seeing now. And therefore we were prepared and are prepared to continue to fight this administration every single step of the way. Today alone, we got 2 preliminary injunctions in 2 different cases that we filed. One against the executive order that requires documentary proof of citizenship in order to vote. And the other challenging the Dear Colleague letter, the letter that was sent to so many schools and universities and colleges across the country, suggesting that diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and programs are not lawful. And we know that that's not the case. So we're doing it. We're doing it. But all of that was built on the legacy that was started by Thurgood Marshall, that was continued by Jack Greenberg, continued by Julius Chambers, followed by Elaine Jones, then continued by the Theodore Shaw, John Payton, Cheryl Neifel, and now the entire team at LDF today.
Janae Nelson.
You're gonna get your flowers today. That's gonna happen. All right, I know members of the audience have questions. I believe the format is those questions have been written on cards. So if we could get those collected, or if you'll raise your hand if you have a question.
So given that we're more manageable one, you all did a great job at your homework. I saw many of you all writing down what you needed. Now that you have those written, if you raise your hand, you're manageable enough. And I lost my heels a long time ago, so I can move between you, so you can raise your hands, that's just fine. That's right.
Ian Courts, counsel at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, along with my colleague Dominique Ernie, who you also know. She is a Marshall Motley scholar. Yes. My question is, what Thurgood Marshall, like so many of us in here, inspired me to pursue a legal career. It wasn't until I got in my last year of my legal career at Central, North Carolina Central, that I was pushed by the school to publish a law journal article, and I discovered William Hasty. For so many people who don't know, he was civil rights activist, worked with Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston. But there was not a lot of information on him, and he was somebody that I will quote as being footnoted in history. How will the Legal Defense Fund kind of uplift some of those footnoted people like Pauli Murray, William Hasty, and so many others within the fight?
Well, thank you for raising those names. Those are so many forgotten heroes and sheroes in the struggle. And that just underscores, the point of the importance of these archives. Pauli Murray is someone who was mentioned, they were affiliated with some study of what she does, or center. And she was actually integral to the strategy around Brown. And many people don't know that, right? She is someone who, from a very early time, was unequivocal about the complexity of her identity, her gender identity, her identity as a woman, and someone who was working sort of outside the legal system to still affect change within the legal system. I think of James Nabrick, and so many people. I mean, I could go on and on about the number of folks that deserve our recognition. So I'm glad that you were encouraged to do that study and that you produced some scholarship on that. And we hope that our archives can be a repository of some of those untold or lesser told stories. But I do want to say a quick word, because you mentioned Marshall Motley Scholars. And we do have a Marshall Motley Scholar with us, Dominique Ernie. And the Marshall Motley Scholars Program is meant to continue this legacy, named after Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, who, if you don't know about, you must read the biography of her civil rights queen by Tamiko Brown Hagan. She was one of the first women lawyers at the Legal Defense Fund, the first. And she was, the superlatives don't do her justice. She was a pioneer and trailblazer on so many levels, the first federal Black woman federal judge. In so many ways, she argued 11 cases before the Supreme Court and won nearly all of them. And the one that she didn't was later overturned in her favor. So she was just killer on every level. And we thought that it was so important for us to recognize these two icons in LDF's history as we created a program to fully fund people who are entering law school for the purpose of becoming racial justice lawyers in the South. They are dedicating the first, if not all of their career, the first part of their career, to doing that racial justice work in the South where most Black people live. And Dominique is an exemplary demonstration of what we intended to do with that. And she is now working here in North Carolina. And I'm proud to say that as of this year, she is one of 50 students that have come through the program and will be seeding the South with the next army of freedom fighters.
I want to take a quick moment though, I'm in the habit of doing this now, whenever I'm with them. Talk about people you should know about. James Williams, sitting up here, was the public defender here in Orange County. And is a great criminal justice lawyer, as well as a lawyer who has worked and continues to work for civil rights. I want you all to know who he is.
Thank you, President. Janae, I'm glad that you mentioned, because I saw on the result in the lawsuit against the Department of Education and the TRO. And the question that I had written down, because I didn't know that you were going to mention it, I had written a question before you mentioned it, was something along the lines of the significance of that decision, particularly in light of the fact that this is the 70-year anniversary of Brown 2. And so that still would be the question, but I think more importantly, I want to get your sense of the significance. What are the most significant challenges today, particularly if they might lend themselves to some litigation, to achieving that educational equality that was envisioned, by Brown?
Yeah, that's a question that can take up the next hour. I'll try to answer it as quickly as I can. So the challenge that we brought is, I think, one of those critical cases because it helps to stem the tide of, or what I should call a tidal wave of orders that are using this mischaracterization of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility to effectively dismantle the entire civil rights infrastructure and to make racial progress, racial equity unlawful effectively in this country. And so this is just the beginning. As you said, it's a temporary order and we'll have to continue to litigate it to the full conclusion. But it's important to push back on this newfangled weapon that is, a derivative of the mass resistance to Brown. And I'm so glad that you raised Brown too, because last year we celebrated the 70th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, and this year we are celebrating Brown 2. Brown 2 is a case that, not as many people know about, but it took a second wave of litigation to enforce Brown 1, to enforce the overturning of the separate but equal doctrine that Plessy versus Ferguson had entrenched in this country for so long. And even after Brown 2, it took more litigation to continue to live out the full promise of Brown, which we never fully did, right? Because every step of the way, there has been opposition. LDF continues to hold the largest number of desegregation cases in this country outside of the Department of Education. Our work to continue to desegregate schools in this country, not simply for the purpose of having, students of different colors learn together, but for the purpose of education equity, right? For the purpose of ensuring that Black children are not starved from an enriching education is an ongoing fight. So that challenge is an important one. There are a number of cases that I think, make that much harder. Like Rodriguez, the case that makes it so that the funding for public schools is a tax-based one. And we know that disproportionately harms socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods in which Black and Brown students are concentrated. So there are a number of structural and doctrinal barriers to this work. But what the hope I find in this moment is that this is kind of exposing it all. And I'm hoping that with that exposure, we can finally get more people to see and hear what we have been saying for the past 8 decades.
I want to add also that one of the things that Trump is trying to do by executive order is to overturn a decision in constitutional law, Plyler versus Doe, in which the Supreme Court back in the 1970s ruled that children of undocumented immigrants who were in the United States, many of them born in the United States, that they had a right to public education. Trump is trying to undo that by executive order, which of course he doesn't have the power to do, but as I often say, he wouldn't know the Constitution if he tripped over it, and he does that every day.
Hi, my name is Monica. I'm a new community organizer with LDF. And I am thinking what you said about the thought that our generation does not have to fight as hard as prior generations. I think that a lot of people my age don't actually understand like that the gravity of the situation and that the civil rights movement, the way that it or the way that people have to devote their lives to it is what we have to do now. And so I wanted to hear thoughts on like what you guys think we can do with these oral histories to talk about like how it's regular people who have that who were swept up into the movement and that this is something that has to be sustainable and has to be part of the like cultural fabric of our lives.
So I'll start, and one of the most important things to extract from these interviews and to remind ourselves of is at the time that many of these folks were doing the work that they're now talking about in their dens, surrounded by books, they were young. They were really young people. And that really needs to be translated and conveyed. Because it's easy to have young folks look at these and say, oh, that was generations ago, or of course, those folks, who have the gray hair and the wisdom, were the ones who helped to do all this important work and, little me, I can't do that. Not at all. Most of that work happened and was driven by young people. And I think that is the danger of showing history from with such a long lens, which is why I think it's important that we capture some of our clients right now. Some of the folks who are young and doing this work in this moment. Let's have them be interviewed now. We have some older folks we gotta get to first, but let's try to interview some of these folks now to continue to show future generations how critically important it is for young people to partner with more seasoned advocates and organizers and others to get this work done. It's gonna take all of us in this moment. It's gonna take every single one of us. If you protested in the 60s and you thought your job was over, it's not. It may be different from what you did in the 60s, but it's not over. And young people who've never been part of a protest or didn't grow up, in this era of activism, this is your time. This is your time. You've got to develop that muscle. It's what is needed. It's what is required. No one of us is exempt. And so we've got to enable people to see themselves as part of this next wave of change.
Martin Luther King Jr. was 26 years old when he was chosen to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. If you don't know the story of the Children's Crusade in Birmingham, that's a story you should know. Children as young as 5, 6, 7 years old protesting, and they came pouring out of the schools to march. It's a powerful story. There's a wonderful clip I remember seeing of a little boy and a rather cynical reporter was trying to show that this boy was being used, that he didn't know what he was talking about. And he asked him, why was he out there demonstrating? The boy was the age where, you know, you lose your two front teeth. And, his response was, "Teeth 'em." You know, if we're gonna get through this moment, it's not gonna be because of somebody my age. It's gonna be because of young people. This is in your hands now. It's not to say that we aren't gonna continue to fight, because, I hope that we don't know any better. You know, I hope that we can't do anything else but fight. But if we're gonna win this fight, it's not gonna be, because we old people winning. It's gonna be because of young people.
I want to thank the audience for their questions and thank our guests today for their time with us. Thank you. I understand that we have a special presentation for Professor Shaw. So let me give you a little backstory. No, so last year, it was the 70th anniversary of Groundbreaking Board of Education. And it was also a special anniversary for Ted Shaw. And he was unable to be with us at our National Equal Justice Awards dinner last year. His beautiful daughter, Zora, was able to come and accept the invitation on his behalf, and Jack Boger was there as well. But we didn't really get to celebrate him in the way that we wanted to, which is why we wanted to show you the video that was part of the tribute that we gave him this evening. And so much to Ted's chagrin, who doesn't like all of this attention, by not showing up last year, he's just gonna get this attention over and over and over again. So I don't know if that was intentional on your part, but you have now teed it up, which is why you saw that wonderful video. We are preserving the presentation, the official presentation of the award to him, although Zora has already held it. But when we have our commemoration of LDF's 85th anniversary on May 15th of this year. So stay tuned.
Thank you for today. I know I'm standing in between everyone and our reception afterwards, so I'll make this very brief. I just want to thank everyone. This has been a powerful gathering. And we've heard stories that just don't document history. They demand that we continue to engage with it. We've explored how memory becomes movement, how archives become action, and how the voices of our Black lawyers, clients, local council, organizers, and everyday freedom fighters are reshaping our collective future. I'm especially grateful for our panelists, speakers, our keynote guests, Professors Ted Shaw and Meredith Clark, and our President Director Counsel Janae Nelson, for reminding us that LDF's history is not static, but it's a living, breathing call to defend, disrupt, and dream. And to the UNC Southern Oral History Program, it has been a pleasure to meet you in person. We've been corresponding, Melody, Seth, Jesse. I got to meet Jacqueline Gallup Hall, who brought the Southern Oral History Project or program to life. And Renee, it's been a pleasure to meet you too. We look forward to the next chapter of working with you. And I must give our archives team their flowers. Coming on as the director of the Thurgood Marshall Institute, I couldn't have dreamed of joining a team that has taught me what it means to be an archivist. Cass has been a pioneer in terms of being an archives council. She is one of only one in our nation, and she is brilliant in terms of protecting our documents and shepherding them to the public. And I also want to thank everyone who has joined us here in person and virtually. Thank you for walking with us for this work. And I want to just leave us with a charge to carry forward what we've learned today, not just as an inspiration, but an instruction that history is a call to action. The record is growing. We will continue to publish our archival records. Ted Shaw mentioned Jean Fairfax. We're working on releasing that collection. Part of the collection is very big at the end of this month. And so we hope that you will continue to engage with the website, to reach out to us and become partners with us as we shepherd this work into the public. So please join us now in the atrium for a reception, and we look forward to continuing the conversation there and developing community with you. So thank you and onward.